Teicher. I am the Chief Content Officer here at Brand Innovators, and I will be your host for the day. So thank you all for joining us. We have a fantastic group of speakers, marketing leadership from Wells Fargo, from Unilever, from Lenovo. We have the CMOs of Vistaprint and SiriusXM. We have an amazing group of moderators today, so we are really excited for today's program. Please be sure to ask questions, use the chat. You can engage your speakers, your fellow attendees. There's the Q&A function, so please do not hesitate to submit those questions. We do allocate time for them on the tail end of every fireside chat. As always, we use the hashtag BILivecast. So if you are posting or talking about the event on Twitter or LinkedIn, you are welcome and encouraged to use that hashtag BILivecast. As always, if you have colleagues, team members, industry friends that you think would benefit from today's content, you are more than welcome to send them the link that you used to register for today's event, and they'll be able to join in. Everything, in case you miss anything, will be on demand, available on our site. We have a whole on-demand section with all of our archived content, so you can check that out afterwards or send it to anyone who you think might be interested. And lastly, before we kick off, a little bit of a sneak preview, just for next month. If you haven't seen, we have not just one, but two marquee level events. We have our 10-year anniversary coming up, June 8th through 10th. That's going to be a fantastic program. And then our C-Suite and Marketing Leadership Program, June 21st to 24th, in lieu of our annual tentpole event and residency at Cannes. So with that, without further ado, I am thrilled to welcome our first speakers of the day. We have James O'Leary, Senior Vice President and Head of Brand at Wells Fargo, along with Dan Ackerman, the Vice President of Client Development at The Trade Desk. We're going to be covering some great ground, including topics like brand trust and addressing that in a very audience-targeted way versus a typical broader scale approach that the banking industry often uses. So it's going to be a great conversation. We are thrilled to have Dan and James with us today. Welcome, friends.
Thanks, David. Great to be here.
We are thrilled to have you.
Welcome. Thank you.
Can you hear us and see us, James? Oh, there you are. All right. So, Dan, the stage is yours. Take it away. I'll be back in a little bit when it's time to wrap up.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot, James. Great to see you again.
And, likewise, Dan. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Excited about this one. A great prep call, and I think there's just a ton of insight and value that you're going to bring to the entire Brand Innovators community today, in really an awesome role at a great organization in such an interesting time. I think just as to set the table a little bit, maybe ad nauseum and a lot of these things we've talked about, the impact of all of the events that we experienced as a global community last year. But I think that the role of marketing, to me, has become even more prominent. We've taken on as marketers and companies that help to service marketers and being successful, a much broader role. It's helping to navigate these long-time, very important brands in the community in how they're received, but also just taking advantage and being very open and listening to the moment and being able to react to that in really meaningful ways and be the contributors to the community that we all want to be. We're not just kind of monolithic brands. We are woven into the communities that we operate in. And I think your team and Wells really shined during what was probably the most challenging year in a really interesting transitional time for you guys. So again, thrilled to have you here, thrilled to have this conversation, and really want to just dig into it. Anything that you wanted to say as a preamble to the conversation, or you want to dive into the content?
I know, just to thank you for that preamble. I think there'll be a lot of people proud to hear perception that we stepped up when much of the culture and country needed us to. So.
Yeah, and such a fascinating time, as we talked about. Wells is such a iconic brand, and certainly, the stagecoach and the colors are something that certainly folks in the West, but now that it's expanded and is really well permeated across the entire U.S. But as you joined, as we talked about the other day, it was a bit of a transition. It was a time to kind of rethink how the brand lived in market, how it was perceived by consumers, and it was a journey that you began, I think, back in 2018. And would love to just start there of like what that, after coming out of a long really successful career in the consumer electronics space, and then kind of moving into telco, what that looked like as you entered the fray in a very highly regulated industry, and one that is everybody uses every day, and kind of what that looked like as you were entering that journey with you and your team.
Well, I would love to share that. It was a fantastic journey so far. Entering a highly regulated industry, one that had a learning curve I would never have predicted. I perceive that some of my experience at Sony, and even some of the experience I had working on great brands like AOL and Yahoo as part of Verizon, that I'd experienced compliance, I'd experienced regulation, but I've never experienced regulation like we do in financial services. I joined Wells in February of 2018. That was a little less than 2 years into a moment in time that was really unique for this company. 170 years old, but a sales practice challenge that was uncovered in 2016 had the brand at its lowest point in trust in 170 years, like without a doubt. But I think I was set up for helping the company, and I hopefully helped the company in some meaningful ways. In kind of my approach to brand, I believe fundamentally that a brand exists here between people's ears, in their mind. And that when someone sees a logo, hears a name, like sees something that reminds them of a brand, what they think of as the brand, that is the reality of a brand. So knowing that, like, have to understand that there's a really intentional way to build perception through the combination of what you say and what you do. And what you say and what you do needs to be inextricably linked. You can't have a say-do gap. And we had a say-do gap probably in the most significant way. We were literally found to be doing the opposite of what we were saying. Not just a gap, but like completely inverted. And at the most macro sense and most macro of scales, since we proudly serve 1 in 3 households and 10% of middle market companies and small business in the US, we had a significant say-do gap with all these people. But however, sales practice issues aside, and that say-do gap, we had a number of micro say-do gaps. We were saying that we were innovating digital banking, but our logo literally didn't render well on a mobile device. In fact, I learned that our logo prior to the release in 2019 was last designed in 1998, like pre-Y2K. So how would we ever have expected our logo to be rendering in a way that perceived? So we had micro and macro kind of say-do gaps. And I think my experience in my journey prior to Wells Fargo helped me really evaluate these different gaps and think about how to help the company close them. Either help the company evolve what we're saying, or show up and deliver experiences that are more closely linked to what we're saying.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We talked about that's a daunting task to even go through and do the diligence to uncover all of those things, to know what the starting line is. I think you've got a good sense of kind of where the destination or the finish line was, but coming in and starting to unpack all those things. What was key for you in developing the relationships with your colleagues and starting to set the tone of how we're going to operate and start to clean those things up, but also just going forward, this is going to be our structure. This is going to be our charter, and how we achieve and get to that finish line.
I think a lot of my naivete in the industry, being new to the industry, it gave me the permission to ask questions that maybe others wanted to ask but didn't feel like they could ask because they should know the answers. But I can ask them, and people don't expect me to know the answers. So I was able to guide a lot of conversations through inquiry. I helped the company look deeply at drivers of acquisition and retention in our industry, not something we had looked at so deeply through growth and history. And how do we make sure that we can really appreciate that we are called financial services for a reason? We are commoditized, and our products, what we want to call products, are really services for customers that we need to make sure that we deliver really good services and good value. It also allowed me to come in and question things that maybe hadn't been questioned before. Things traditionally like visual and verbal identity. Like, why is our tone and voice showing up in this manner? Do we really want to sound like this? It also allowed me to have an appreciation for where there's deep equity. You mentioned like colors. We're a red and yellow brand. I'm not sure there are many in this brand marketing community that would of brand innovators that would ever define a brand from scratch and say, I want a brand that's red and yellow. But I had a brand that was red and yellow, and for decades, in more than a century, there's equity built in that. So do you double down and figure out how to make that work so that you don't feel like other brands that own those colors? And I think we really found a way to do that. And I was also able to come in and ask questions about some really highly emotional parts of our brand, some of our customer service aspects, the stagecoach. And I think I was fortunately in a position to be given the leeway to ask those questions and then uncover and help guide in some direction.
Yeah. So with that diligence, and as you kind of arrived on, what the sentiment, the personal, the emotional, the operational, how did you start to lay the groundwork for making those brand changes to start making kind of material progress and, moving towards reorienting how consumers think about how they experience the brand?
Align on some principles that we could all agree we wanted to be. Whether we were delivering a product or a service, or we were showing someone an advertisement and wanted them to react to what they digested in that 30 seconds. Let's commit to some principles. And allowed us to reframe some approaches. So from a design perspective, we said to ourselves, if we know we had this gap and our brand was designed again in 1998, prior to that, let's leapfrog. Let's design first for mobile and then figure out how to make business cards work. Let's match offline color to online what I see on the screen, which is the opposite of what I had done in every other part of my career. Start to make sure you love what someone brought as a beautiful printout on their boards to your meeting, and then figure out how to replicate it digitally. We did the inverse. And I think it really allowed us to understand the value of how does what was ketchup and mustard become really bright and optimistic reds and yellows. It also allowed the people in the company to see that our logo itself, our iconic symbol of a stagecoach, may not be as meaningful as we thought, or might hold us back. And we could see that both through testing and deep customer research, but you could also see it when you're designing for something that was so antiquated for the mobile space. So I think some of these principles of really innovating the brand and designing the brand in a very different way was a big part of that.
Yeah, and it's the serendipity of decisions that you make as foundational, and then you're faced with a complete change in societal behavior. We're no longer allowed to go to banks. We can no longer interact physically with the brands in a geo perspective, and we're forced to do everything via mobile. Kind of met consumers where they were in an unintended fashion. How did that kind of accelerate where you had seen, how consumers perceive the brand, but how they interacted? You just kind of took us through having that kind of digital orientation from the start. How did that then align with just the change in society and the experience in the last 18 months?
Yeah, well, there's a few things. We had done some. We didn't know. I don't think any of us could have predicted what we've gone through the last 18 months, but we had some foundation. We really started to think through how do we value and measure trust differently. We broke down trust in really human ways. We have a framework internally we like to reference. We call the 3 C's of trust. It's competence, character, caring. How do you make sure that you're delivering the best products and services so that's your competence? How do you make sure you're continuously demonstrating integrity and ethics? That's a place we really needed work, character. And then caring, how do you show empathy and interest in the customers and employees? And when we were able to understand that deeply, it allowed us to really think through what impact the pandemic was having on folks. So, we leaned into really quickly having to understand what are the psychographic components of what is happening to people. We really were able to sit back and say, where are our customers or employees on this journey? Last March, it was confusion. It was fear, right? We were hoarding toilet paper. It's kind of crazy, but we didn't know what else to do. So we actually projected out multiple phases of a recovery, not linked to time because we didn't know the time scale, right. But we knew as humans, Eventually we would hit rock bottom. Eventually, hopefully things would turn around. We'd have optimism and we'd be on a path to a future. And we kind of tried to lay out some psychographic components of recovery. And then we did it for different audiences, B2C, B2B. And then actually very quickly, I would say by like mid-April, we learned it was going to be different in New York versus Florida versus California. And like take the, political commentary away and jokes from that. Literally the states had their own rules. So we had to then look at the psychographic dimensions, and our dimension of time became more a dimension of geography that defined time. So we had to put a lot of art to our data so that we knew we weren't showing up. Because the last thing we want to do is someone's worried about making their mortgage payment next week. And we show up with an ad that says, here's our new rates, you should refi. That would be completely not in any of the 3 C's. Yeah. So we had to make some smart choices like a lot of companies did. Let's turn off all BAU advertising until we figure it out. Let's turn it back on only when we knew we had the right thing to say. So those are some of the operations that we did.
Yeah. I know we didn't chat about this, but just curious on that last comment. I think it really speaks to also the relationships that you have with your third parties. Because to control that kind of knowledge, that kind of awareness and all of that thinking internally isn't easy, but easier. What were some of the ways that you had your vendors and your partners lean in so there was a good kind of symbiotic relationship as you were thinking that the implementation happened seamlessly and kind of kept to the strategy that you put in place? Just curious on any highlights or anecdotal stories about how that worked.
Yeah, I don't know if we ever like use this word, because I don't think but it's the closest word I can come up with right now, Dan, because with that question. We sort of like war roomed from the scratch with our partners. Yeah. Even that psychographic recovery, we developed that with a creative ad agency, media agency, and strategy partners all working on it together. It wasn't from like one insights partner that said, here's a recovery. Like we interrogated it from all the different angles that we had to. So I would say like immediately we knew we were going to be smarter and better with our partners. And fortunately, we have some fantastic partners in BBDO and Siegel and Gale from our brand. And we have some fantastic, really strategic writing folks at Maslansky, a lot of strong Omnicom partners largely with us. But we were able to make these decisions together, and they made a lot of recommendations that informed the decisions we made.
Yeah, I think that's a good illustration of how the ecosystem comes together, and I think you really get a deep understanding of those partnerships, the long-term value, and kind of the strategic impact, and how that partnership plays out. We were chatting about some of the things that were, I think, not directly, as I mentioned in the onset of the conversation, that marketing, I feel like the role and the scope has just expanded so significantly. And we talked about a few projects that really made an impact and resonated with me, specifically about how you were managing new things like PPP and ways that the government was stepping in to support the economy and support small businesses as kind of the lifeblood of the economy. It'd be great if you could kind of touch on how you approach that, and how that was a big, I think, a corporate decision, but how that really aligned with your journey that you were on to how consumers thought about the brand, and sticking with that as a practice and not just as a marketing campaign.
Yeah, there was a lot of things we had to think about doing differently. Our customers, the country, the world needed us to, right? We do fundamentally understand the value of a big financial institution is ultimately to enrich people's lives, or it should be. And enrichment took a different form during the pandemic. It took a form of accommodation for loan and payment relief, where typically there are fees and costs associated with a late fee or missing a payment. And we had to figure out how to make sure that didn't happen, right? Those sources of quote unquote maybe revenue of the past couldn't be now, because that wouldn't be enriching the lives of the people that are truly hurt the most. We were also asked to step up, as many other financial institutions were, and help the government execute the Paycheck Protection Program. And we wanted to make sure that we use these moments to be really more enriching moments. And one of the things that we did with payment protection program is this isn't just for Wells Fargo, but anyone that processed a loan for PPP, there was a fee associated with it. We didn't define it, the government defined it, that were to be collected by the financial institutions for processing the loans on the behalf of the government. And one of the things that we did is that we donated all gross processing fees from the payment protection program. It's about $420 million to date. We put that back to work in the industry. We took no profit off of that fund. So we created an Open for Business fund. The Open for Business fund empowers small businesses that with technical assistance, long-term resiliency programs, sometimes cash infusion. We worked with local communities and nonprofits to make sure the money went to the most impacted small businesses, which happen to be the more diverse, ethnically, racially diverse, and female-owned small businesses. They were impacted the most during this. We worked with community leaders to make sure it was executed at a local level, because many of those diverse-owned businesses, their needs and their infrastructure are local. They may not be nationally digitally savvy the way bigger businesses are. So that was one of the things that we really did. And then now, a year later from that, because it's crazy to say, it was May last year when PPP started. We started a campaign in market 3 weeks ago. The tagline is "We made a way together," and we're now celebrating the successes of these small businesses that we also supported. And we are celebrating the success by highlighting the small business owners, the names of the small businesses. Our media is being media that's translating into awareness and logo visibility for these small businesses in their local markets. It's a hyper-local execution, a lot of digital lead. So we're just really proud to have been a part of it. And now we're able to say that, like, we feel like we were a part of their success. And, you know, we really were a part of their success, because it was the small business owners' resiliency that really created such an opportunity. And we were just happy to be able to support it.
Yeah, it's a great organic way to create, stories that resonate and really support, the brand journey that you and the company are on, in a very important, customer constituency, but also, a way to really start to have the brand resonate in a more, emotional fashion and not in a commoditized. Through that experience, were there some big lessons, good takeaways for you and the team that you think can be applicable in kind of the normal course of business? These were things that were acute market changes that you had to make changes, you had to react to. But is there anything that then kind of just changes fundamentally how you operate, as a leader, but also as marketers going forward?
Yeah, I think we're still digesting and learning a lot of that, but it has its, some benefits are that folks that were maybe resilient to agile approaches aren't any longer. They now see the value of being able to be nimble and possibly have agile PMO set up, because we do need to be able to turn and work quickly on a dime. I think it also showed a lot of the value of committing to long-term strategies and knowing what decisions to make near term, but not lose sight of long-term. I think one of the things I've observed throughout my career, certainly observed it firsthand at Wells Fargo, trust it's lost in buckets and gained in droplets. So when you go through a challenge like Wells Fargo has, and you have such a level of distrust that we once had and we still continue to come back from, you're not going to come back overnight. Look at case studies like British Petroleum, BP, J&J with Tylenol. It took years or decades for those brands to come back anywhere near the levels. And I think we understand we're on that journey as well. But knowing what our multi-year journey was, it allowed us to make decisions like, okay, we should do something with these processing fees. We should create this Open for Business fund. It allowed us to make those decisions quickly. It didn't take weeks of deliberation in a boardroom about creating this fund. These things were able to create it. These concepts were created in hours. Yeah. And that was really the thing that we're trying to operationalize that in a BAU. I worry we're going to over processize it and create, productize it and create too much mechanism and lose some of the essence. But we are regulated, so we do have to have processes and compliance to things. So we even have to create a lot of process around agile. But I think we don't want to lose that mindset.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. You talked about, again, kind of the need during the last 18 months of really understanding the nuance of different regions, different markets, in the way that you bring that message to consumers in those individual areas, and also just the difference of where people are and what their experience is. As you think about that as a practice, deeper understanding of the consumer, deeper understanding of what's happening in those local markets as it relates to your paid marketing, and how that translates into the data that you use to arrive at those understandings, and then how that gets infused into the deployment of these marketing campaigns.
Yeah.
Anything that you would share with the audience today, and just best practices that you've learned that you're implementing as you go forward as it relates to data, and really getting to personalizing and getting crisp on the message, the right message to the right audiences.
Yeah, I think one of the primary things I'll comment, and this is not unique, so I actually feel silly saying it, but you need stronger narratives and more creative ways to message if you do want to be deeply targeting. Because I can't deeply target Dan Ackerman the way I would deeply target James O'Leary. It's not going to feel authentic.
Yeah.
So really being able to understand that while the data might help you really focus in on key areas and meet people where they are, you also have to be much more intelligent about how you do show up. And I think that's an area where there's a lot of opportunity, and we've had a fantastic opportunity to bring great experience from people who spent their careers in PR that can now lean into marketing, because a lot of the muscle memory that they had from PR can be applied to narratives that are needed for marketing execution. So there's a lot of blurring of like comms, marketing, PR, things are coming together. So we aspire to be much more targeted. We aspire to be much better about our targeting, but I think we've learned the strength and the need for narratives and for storytelling.
Yeah, which creates, I guess, even more challenges and complexity as you get that storytelling becomes more diverse and more targeted. It's definitely a creative challenge. So just interested in as you go forward on that brand journey, and you're 3 years into it. As you look towards the now, and kind of we have some light at the end of the tunnel in the recovery, where do you think there's opportunity for organizations to not lose that agile nature and those lessons? You're in a regulated industry and you've got to apply a lot of process, but just in terms of advice and kind of thought, like maybe put yourself back in your Sony days or in your Verizon days, some of those fundamentals that were created and developed during this time, but are really important to persist because the market's essentially changed forever.
Yeah, I think some of the things I've learned from observing what some of the small businesses we've been able to work with have pivoted, deeply understanding the value you create and what drives trust in your brand. Mm-hmm. Like understanding it at like a really, really committed level where you're honest with yourself. Because if you need to pivot, you need to make sure you pivot without losing that. If you pivot away from your core, you could be completely disrupted. So I think I've really started to appreciate the value of like trying to commit to what your drivers are. The other thing I've personally embraced a lot is, I've had a number of people say this to me throughout my career, and I've packaged it in this manner, which is I'm kind of equal parts delusional and practical. And I've got to embrace that because I want to be able to think big and be delusional, but I have to be able to execute. If I can't deliver, my value is not going to be there for the company. So that's something I've really kind of embraced. How do I make sure that I can know when to dial those up and then those down? And then something that I fortunately have always had, because even when I was agency side, I was working on some of the best CPG brands. But then when I first came client side to Sony, like innovation is kind of part of what I do, and questioning everything and thinking about how to do something differently, even if it's working. It's just kind of how my mind works. And I think that's a tremendous value to always have on. And I think if anyone can have that on for their brand, they're always going to be ready for a disruption that might occur. I look back on the last year at Wells Fargo, and one of the things that I'm really proud of is the industry, not just Wells Fargo, that this is an industry, this is the industry, the only industry I've been in where it is such an emotional topic, finances, yet the emotional connection that you have with your institution is so low. People have a higher emotional connection with Pepsi than they do their bank, which is wild in thought, but it's very practical in the reality. And when we look back on data that we get from partners, and there was a good JD Power survey last week, that 3/4 of people feel like their bank stepped up to help them. And 90% of those people are now committed to staying with their bank longer than they would have been because of the last year. So as an industry that's typically not really connected in an emotional way, that's a really emotional set of data to get back. And that's just something I'm really proud of, that a lot of our industry stood up together.
Yeah, I think this term, kind of meeting consumers or meeting people where they are, is pretty prominent, and those brands that kind of stepped up and did that, I think the positive ripples and the long-term effect of that will be felt for a while. On that topic, there's also the internal component, our leadership and the way that we engage and meet our teammates and our employees where they are. You guys are on this big kind of brand transformation journey, and then kind of reacting and proactively navigating through the pandemic. Not easy to do when you have teams not only distributed around the country, but no longer in offices together. But what were some of the experiences that you had and ways that you kept that good connectivity between the team to be able to step up and move fast and be agile and do things that clearly resonated with the marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, I might be off on these numbers a little bit, but we've got about 250,000 employees. About 200,000 are still working from home or not in offices. About 50,000 never went home because they were frontline. They're in branches servicing people. So we have a fantastic amount of gratitude for our employees who stayed safe, stayed on the front lines, and were essential workers in their own right. But also the 200,000 people that went home, that's bigger than many cities. I think 250,000 people would be like a top 100 city in the US. So our leadership team in technology, I don't know how they figured it out, but seemingly overnight, they figured out how to get that many people on communication services, on video. We've been able to figure out how to be as human as possible in this dimension, where clearly we have video fatigue like many of us have, but it's a benefit. We've been able to try to find a way to make sure that we all remember we are human. I manage people that lost family members to the illness. I lost a family member to the illness. I just had another team member still last week lose her father to the illness. So we are very human, and we have to be there to support each other. One of the things that we were really able to do is everyone has defined roles. They have defined, we call them MBOs, KPIs, how your success is as an employee.
Yeah.
But we had to create a culture where people could step in for each other. And I have team members that for the last 12 months did stuff dramatically different than were on their MBOs 15 months ago, but we needed to figure that out. They needed to step in. We needed to figure out how to be a team. So I think just trying to figure out how to help all of our employees understand that we're going to get through this together as a community. And then also allow people to show up and just have a good day, have a bad day. I think, I tried to create forums for conversation, open and honest forums for conversation. But I also, as a leader, have bad days. And I'm sure there's a dozen people that I work with that are listening to this right now and said, James was not, the most empathetic on this day in September when I needed him. But I hope that I had more of those moments that were empathetic than weren't, because that's what we were trying to create together.
Yeah, I mean, it's I always try to look at things glass half full, and I think it's one of the most probably lasting impacts of that experience is just the depth of the relationships, and out of necessity, creating trust where people and kind of demonstrating their ability to really step up and go way beyond the bounds of their remit or the bounds of their, the things that they're incentivized to do, MBOs, whatever those incentives are. So yeah, it's awesome to hear. And, it sounds like with a big organization and big challenge that is really coming together and probably shape the way you look at new additions to your team in thinking about those attributes and those fundamentals. Can they do that same thing and kind of contribute in a similar fashion? Just a last couple things, and I think we're going to move on to Q&A. But in terms of, we talked a little bit about mechanisms to kind of like to measure how things are resonating with consumers, and as you put all of these different stages of this brand transformation. Anything that you can, share with the audience around, good mechanisms that have helped to kind of be a gauge for, success on those?
Yeah, so we've got an ecosystem of mechanisms, I would say. We've got longer term metrics of trust. We've got nearer term metrics of trust, like our contribution to those 3 C's. Long-term trust being truly about a metric of trust. And then we've got really near-term metrics of like performance of activities, whether it's a campaign or an experience we've created.
Yeah.
And how do we make sure that they are laddering, they are feeding back? We try to deploy a few different things. Nearer term, we look at traditional campaign things, exposed, unexposed. Did we create a lift? We also look at NPS, which is a really important tool for us. We look at touchpoint NPS, so NPS of my actions on a mobile device, NPS of going into a branch. But then we've also created a relationship NPS, which crosses touchpoints. That's kind of a mid metric for us, if you will, where trust is a long term. So, I think we're constantly optimizing and look at new ways to measure, because one of the things that we need to make sure that we're always trying to figure out is which of these metrics are the indicators of business value. And we know if we can move a few basis points on trust, that it's got enormous business value long term. But what are those nearer term metrics that the brand can move, that can be a halo for the brand? It's a little easier when you have a campaign that's around a product or service. Like, did we get as much click-through and volume? Did we get as much people interested in applying for those products? But when we're doing nearer term brand campaigns, how are we showing that there's an immediate impact? And the way that we kind of try to do that is through those exposed, unexposed lift metrics, and then try to show the narrative value near term and hope that it's providing a long-term value. Yeah,
it makes sense. There's so much conversation now about measurement and metrics and accountability of really everything across the business, but particularly in marketing. And certainly the consumer behavior is putting them in environments where there is more data, there is more inputs and outputs to really understand the impact on any stage of the marketing funnel, but even outside of that, like you're talking about those kind of fundamental trust metrics and how that then relates down to business and adoption of products and services. When you look on the kind of longer horizon, 2-3 years, in terms of how you set the stage for continually pushing the team to innovate and to think about how do we start to even be more proactive in getting ahead, so we can be prepared for things like we experience, but more importantly, in a competitive industry, how you can start to to differentiate. What would you say are kind of fundamentals for raising above the tactical and thinking about innovation on that longer horizon?
Trying to make sure we have the right people and processes in play. How do we make sure that we have got people focused on being able to react in the moment, but understand the implications of those reactions down the line, and the processes that will allow people to react quickly and get to market quickly? So a lot of that agile mindset, but really around people and processes. I think we can get much better in that whole notion of targeting. How are we targeting? When are we targeting? What is the experience we're creating in a really highly targeted communication? Some of that comes in people and process, but a lot of it comes in just our comfort level with the creativity, with the message that we want to deliver. As a bank, we have to deliver messages sometimes that say, you didn't qualify for this loan, sorry. But should we communicate, sorry, you didn't qualify for this loan, sorry, or here's how we can help you maybe get to a point of qualifying? And do we have the infrastructure and service to help with that? So we've got to really think about how to be highly targeted in a meaningful way. And then the last thing that we're excited about, which is feels very insignificant compared to those 2 points, but I think is really powerful, is we haven't unlocked the scale and volume of how to leverage influencers. And I think in an industry where we have such a relationship challenge in terms of emotional investment people have with their relationship with their bank, influencers can be a really powerful tool. I think we're trying to figure out both the compliance and process side of it, which we need to do as a bank, but also how do we leverage the right influencers in the right way? And that's something we're excited about, but we know we're really at the infancy of.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you may have some organic influencers in the small and medium businesses that were helped and really impacted through that. But yeah, it's a whole new frontier, especially in that industry. But to your point earlier about the emotional connection to a soft drink is greater than to your financial institution, even though it taps into all of the heartstrings of everything you do. So that'll be a really interesting journey, and looking forward to maybe seeing some results of that the next time we connect. Seeing a lot of questions that I think we've already answered. I know we only have 3 minutes left, so I would encourage everybody who's tuned in here to put questions into the Q&A. We did have one that just came in, so thank you. So just reading through this for a second. So do you think Wells and the industry learned from the execution of kind of marketing through the 2008 crisis, by demonstrating leadership and compassion, by reinvesting from the COVID relief loans? How do you think that goodwill is done organically, and how do you think that plays into the brand scoring? Hopefully, I've captured that question right.
Yeah, I mean that's a tough one for me to answer given my tenure in the industry, but I do feel like I've been a part of a lot of conversations with colleagues who were around in 2008, and I think they do understand more about the role we play in enriching people's lives much more now than 2 decades ago. So I have confidence in that, but I can't really speak to that, like the correlation directly.
Got it. Well, I know we're coming up, and David will probably be swooping back in. James, I'm really appreciative of the transparency, but also the detail and the real personal connection to the stuff that you guys are working on. As a consumer, certainly resonates. Have been seeing the change, especially here in the home market in San Francisco, where the Stagecoach and the original branding definitely have a much more personal connection to the community. But really impressed and want to keep watching as a fan from the sidelines as you and your team continue through that journey. So thank you so much for the time. Thanks for
thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it.
This was great, guys. Thank you both. Definitely a lot of fantastic topics covered. I keep going back to, this idea that you talked about, James, a little bit earlier on about, you can have all the data, the right person, the right time, the right place, but without the right narrative or the right messaging, you maybe aren't taking full advantage of that data. And, in light of the upcoming cookie deprecation and things like that, and its impact on the data that we have and the targeting opportunities is going to make that messaging all that much more important. So, love that point, and really looking forward to seeing, like you said, Dan, on the influencer side, how that takes off in such a highly regulated industry. And definitely these days on TikTok alone, I see a lot of content around mortgage hacks, investment hacks, loan hacks, and the way that it kind of sometimes feels like a natural fit for a platform like that, more so than Instagram and things like that. So definitely will be interesting to see how things develop. But again, this was fantastic. So Dan, James, thank you both so much for joining and sharing with our community today.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Let's keep the show rolling. We have 2 more great speakers. We have Quinn O'Brien, the Vice President of Marketing for Lenovo, and Scott Neslin, the Vice President of Client Services Central at the Trade Desk, our partner for the day. So let's bring in Scott. Let's bring on Quinn. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks,
Well,
David.
of course, of course. Great to have you here, Quinn. Great to have you here, Scott. Thank you both for joining us.
Definitely.
Oh, it's
All
good
right.
to be here. Thank you.
Of course. So I'll leave it to you, Scott. I'll turn the stage over. I'll be back in about 40 minutes or so, but take it away.
Yeah, happy to. So good afternoon to everybody. And Quinn, thank you for doing this today. Look, it seems very relevant to talk about where we're coming out of the pandemic. And from a marketer's point of view, over a year ago, many marketers made assumptions in terms of what they needed to do during this COVID period. I was wondering if you could maybe walk us back from your perspective and tell us about some of the things that you thought were going to happen. Did they happen? And some of the initiatives that you put in place, and how did they turn out?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think as we went into the pandemic, we were, I think, especially conservative in how we approached it. I think we assumed the worst from a business perspective, and so cut back almost 100% on marketing investment, at least in my world, which is really the overall corporate marketing and marketing the brand. And so we cut back to almost zero, and really focused on things that we could control for very low or no cost. So training our people much more effectively on the brand, insourcing a lot of the capabilities like strategy, creative, production, to be able to continue to generate work out there without incurring cost. Our owned media channels, so we completely cut off paid and went to owned. And then from a measurement perspective, we focused really heavily on reputation. So we wanted to really measure not as much the funnel metrics we traditionally do, but really look at how are people talking about the tech industry, how are people talking about Lenovo and our competitors. And so we kind of went very, very conservative, kind of batten the hatches down in preparation for having a really tough year as a business. And I think we learned a ton, from the process of doing that. How, it's amazing how quickly you can turn everything off. And the kind of the change management process of bringing the team along with us, keeping the morale high, and still continuing to put out work, but also have obviously learned a lot over the last 12 months.
It's interesting you talked about stopping the paid media, which I think many advertisers did. Two questions around that. Did any of that concern you? Because I think marketers, sometimes it's always a bit of a argument and case that you need to make to actually get the budgets that you have. Mm-hmm. So did you have any concerns when things went off? And then second, how impressed or surprised with you regarding the flexibility of commitments? Did anything there surprise you?
I was massively worried about it. I mean, I think money is our lifeline, and we've always gone and argued for money, or requested money, and sometimes argued for it, and generally we're successul. And so it had a steady stream of money out there. And one of the arguments we always made is, if you stop spending, your core brand metrics will drop. So we'd always use the term, coin activated. So you got to keep spending in order to keep building that brand. But we'd never tested that theory, never wanted to. We always had money to spend on it. So this tested that theory. So yeah, I went in on one hand, worried as a marketer, saying, all right, I know when we turn this off, our brand metrics are going to drop. I went in on the other hand, just as someone who had been making this argument for 8 years, going, well, what if they don't drop? Like, there goes my funding source and my argument in the future. So I was worried on multiple fronts as I went in, definitely. And then, I think it's hard to think back to that time because we've been through so much since then. But I mean, the flexibility from our partners, the media properties, the agencies that we use to plan and buy our media was pretty amazing. I think everyone was just in a fog. No one knew what was coming. Everyone was at various stages of panic, both obviously personally, but also, professionally. And, people did the right thing consistently. I mean, we tried to be, moving at speed, but fair. And, so there was a huge sense of urgency on our side to shut everything off. And we tried to be realistic about how to do that. So, but I found everyone we worked with, every one of our partners came at it with really good intentions, not always able to move as quickly as we wanted them to, but you saw them, they were pulling out the stops, doing really, unnatural effort to try to get it done.
And then as you went through the lessons on the pandemic at the beginning, at what point did you feel it had moved from being just a short term, we need to get through this, let's put a few things in place and let's just ride it out, to it's now a new way of working. It's now the way that we are sustaining our marketing efforts. When did that really occur?
Well, we had an interesting view on it because we're a company with a huge presence in China, and so had a line of sight into the pandemic and the potential impact somewhat earlier than a lot of businesses did, because we had, I have a large team in Beijing, and just from talking to them personally, they were experiencing the effects of COVID and hearing about it out of Wuhan, and there was a lot of chatter, a lot of concern, and a lot of proper reaction from our team in China, going, all right, this is going to be quite bad. So we had that very first phase where we looked at it almost before the rest of the world really saw it, and said, all right, this looks really bad for China, which is just such a key market for us. And so we started to prepare for that and started to shift resources and do all those sort of things to make sure we could support China. And then obviously it started to then take over around the world. So we had kind of this steady stream of new realities as we went through. And even, we've got a major presence in India. It's where probably a third of my team is, and it's one of our biggest markets globally. And they're obviously still getting massively hit by this, and they're starting to turn the corner. But a week or two ago, they're probably at rock bottom, and probably one of the heaviest hit countries in the world. So because we're so global and are in so many markets that were deeply affected by it, like China, US, Brazil, India, Italy, ones that just were absolutely, everyone was affected, but these were really, it was pretty significant. So we've just seen a steady, there has been no moment where we were looking at it going business as usual. It's always been, just an effort of going, all right, now we got to go focus on this. Now we have to focus on that. So I think we haven't yet hit we thought we had about 2 months ago, where we were getting into recovery, and then India really started to struggle. And so now we've been all hands on deck trying to figure out how do we support the business, support the people on that side. So it's been pretty tumultuous.
And then for markets like the US that are going into this reopening phase, what advice do you have for brands? How are you as a marketer looking at taking advantage of the reopening, and just any concerns at this stage?
Yeah, I think the way I had been pitching for money in the past was accurate. We turned off all the money, and the brand metrics, they started to decay. So we saw it starting to come down. Now we haven't yet. It's not totally coin operated, so there is a slow glide path down, but we did see that coming down. So I think, one of the lessons I learned is that that is accurate, and we actually are able to use the last 14 months almost as a model to be able to say, if you do move your money like this will happen to your metrics. So it's weird to say, but it's actually been somewhat educational as a marketer to be able to see that glide path down when you turn off the funding. So that's been, I'll say in a positive way, interesting. I think also I mentioned that we insourced a lot of our capabilities at the start of it. We'd already started that before, but we just kind of turbocharged it. And that's been a really interesting learning. I went into sort of pre-pandemic, my mindset was, we probably can't insource everything, but every marketing service, but we can probably insource most of them. And we can really, it wasn't as much about about financial benefit. It was much more about just taking control of what we do ourselves. And so when we went into the pandemic, that mindset continued, and I was going, all right, this is a, never waste a crisis. So this is the moment where we really, accelerate on the insourcing. And we did. And what I found was, I think I think we swung the pendulum too far, probably. I think that this, or in my mind, I was swinging it too far. I think this idea that you can insource close to everything is way off. I think that not having access to the agencies that we used, even while we were insourcing, not having access to the media companies, or not being able to use them because we're not spending, not having access to some of the other partners that we use, particularly production companies around the world, really opened my eyes to the fact that it's not a whole hog thing that you go, all right, let's bring everything in-house. It's got to be much more nuanced than that. And so we're in the process right now, in the US at least, where a third of our team is based, and we've got a lot of our insourcing capabilities, of looking at how do we balance that out a bit? How do we make sure that the teams that we have in-house are really focused on exactly the right thing, but we start to balance that mindset out so it's no longer hell-bent on get everything in-house, but instead is much more balanced, and really creating a set of criteria as to what we do ourselves and what we do externally. So in hindsight, as always, it's the obvious thing and much healthier, but it's very easy to get kind of addicted to that insourcing.
Yeah, and you bring up, with the reentry, getting together with marketing partners. How much of that do you think is going to be accelerating travel for the markets that are reopened, getting people together face to face? Do you see that as a slow ramp up? Do you see it happening sooner rather than later? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's going to be a spike. I think that there will be a massive spike in business travel coming soon out of the US, or at least within the US. And then as soon as we're able to travel internationally, we will. And I think part of it is human nature. I think a lot of us have been very, very used to traveling and have been basically home for 14 months and are looking at it going, all right, going a little stir crazy. I want to go. I want to go out there and start meeting people, see my coworkers, do all that stuff. So I think there's going to be a real push around that. And I also just think that once you're able to, businesses will start to push, particularly on the sales side, for sales teams to go out and meet the customers. And so I think there'll be a natural spike. But I do think that once we're through that first, almost the human nature push of I just got to get on the road and I just got to get on a plane and go get out of my basement. I think it will come back down, and I think it'll come back down to levels below where we were before, for two reasons. One, I think we've proven that we can do this sort of thing really effectively over Zoom. And even some of our toughest meetings, board meetings we have, the in-person executive committee meetings we have, where you would always have traveled to it, no matter where it was. We've done them all like this, so as has everyone. So I think we've proven that you're able to do it. So once we get through that burst of I got to travel, I think it'll be back to all right. Now I can balance work and life a little bit better. And I also think that companies must have seen such a massive savings in T&E over the past 14 months that I think it would be very difficult for the controllers and the finance community in large companies to open that spigot back up. So I think there'll be partly people realizing, oh, I can do this by Zoom, and partly a heightened restriction on your ability to travel.
And the travel question, Quinn, is interesting because it goes hand in hand with which markets are reopening, which ones are still struggling with COVID. You've got a very unique position where you've got a global view of the different markets for your business. I was wondering if you could just walk us through how you see each one of the regions of the world doing on the re-entry issue and how that plays into your thinking as a marketer.
Yeah, I mean, I've got the most direct view, obviously, of the U.S. because I'm sitting here, every day looking at it, and I think most of the people on the call have a pretty good sense of the US. I think when you go outside the US, China is, I guess what I'd say is fine and on alert. So they're traveling within the country. They're meeting in person. Talking about my teams there. They're all in the office. They're traveling. They're on shoots. They're doing, it's sort of business as usual within China, but heavily on alert. Like they're very strict on quarantine of people coming in and regulations of people coming in. But even so, they occasionally get outbreaks, but are really good at, they're very, very savvy at how to contact trace and all of those things. So I think they're as close to back to normal as any market that I see. India is the exact opposite. Like I said, they are, my team there is sequestered in their homes. They're allowed out for 1 hour a day to go to the market at a pre-prescribed time. And basically they're prohibited from leaving their house, or at least that's the case it was last week. I don't know about this week. And hospitals are full to capacity. People are struggling to get oxygen. I mean, it's really, really terrible what's happening there. The death rate is really awful. So I think they are really struggling. Brazil, another big market for us, is struggling as well. You look at Europe, the UK has been on a bit of a roller coaster. I mean, they came out very strong, opened the pubs back up, declared hugging to be fine, which felt wonderfully British. And then I think are seeing a bit more of a spike now, and so are being very cautious. And then around the rest of Europe, actually, it's interesting. You get in a bubble here where I look at it, and a lot of the people, most of the people I know who want the vaccine have been vaccinated in the US, or at least have a very near plan to be vaccinated. When I talk to senior execs in EMEA, in Europe, they are not. They're not able to get it. And so it just kind of reminds you that it is a different world. I mean, these are people with every means to be able to go and do it, and they can't get the vaccine. So I'm always cautious to not get too into the US bubble, to realize that everyone is in and around the world, people are very mindful of the fact that everyone in every market is in a very different spot.
Yeah, and then when you think about how that plays into a marketer's perspective on what you're doing in certain markets, does that mean some initiatives are launching quicker, faster in other markets, and some you're still pulling back like everybody was 6-8 months ago?
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, take India, for example, where we're pulling way back on what we were planning on doing in India from a marketing perspective. Partly because our teams aren't well, are sick, and need to spend time and focus on their families. Partly because the market is just incredibly, understandably distracted right now. So it's not a good time to be out there with a message. From a brand perspective, we're putting everything into kind of ESG, charity, like how do we help the people of India? And so it's really changed our marketing plans there. Other markets are being more opportunistic about it because their situation is a bit more stable. We do a lot in the healthcare industry. We do a lot around helping healthcare customers to be much smarter about their data, much smarter about treating patients, things like that. And so we're putting a lot of those messages out in the market in those markets, just trying to be relevant, trying to be in touch with what people are talking about, and being part of the solution while still also marketing our products. We're also doing that. Some markets are going into their education buying season right now, and so we're very heavily going in there with a learn from home message instead of offering. So we're trying to be really sensitive to where it's really bad, and basically just treat those as a complete separate case where we do exactly what's right for the situation. And then in other markets where it's a bit more stable, just trying to be relevant to what, and we're not even distinguishing between kind of consumer commercial audience, just what humans are talking about and thinking about right now, which is generally education and healthcare. And so just trying to position ourselves in those spaces.
And that's interesting too, because I would imagine that as you're going through that planning, what you're going to do in each market, it goes a little bit back to your comment on in-housing and deciding what you take in-house and what you don't. I was really interested in sort of, we go back in time. What do you think are the main factors that causes a marketer to think, what in-house services should we have?
Yeah.
And you could just lay out for us sort of the decision-making process. I think a lot of people would like to hear that.
Yeah, I think there's generally two. The most common one is cost, and it's cost pressure. People coming in saying, you're one of the biggest expense line. Marketing is one of the biggest expense line items on the P&L, and you need to cut back. And so generally, one lever you can pull to do that is to bring work in-house. So that's typically the main one. That's generally not a positive one. You're generally doing it under duress and not necessarily thinking about it logically. You're thinking about, all right, how do I cut the most expensive things and bring them in-house? And so that doesn't necessarily always lead to the best behavior. The other trigger, which is the one we were under, which is more interesting almost, is when you realize that you actually understand your brand better than anyone outside of the firewall can. And that comes over time as you work with really good agencies, really smart strategists, account people, creative people, the best in the business, and realize that they don't really get your company and your brand. And they can't. I mean, they don't live it every day. They're not, like I said, behind the firewall. They don't have the badge. They don't get the benefit of people opening up to them. They don't have a beer with coworkers after work. Like they don't have all of that really gets both the content, but more importantly, the tone and the voice of the brand really right. So we hit a point where we felt like we were doing good work with our agencies, but we always would look at it and go, it's not quite right. It's not quite the voice. It's not quite, they're not really getting to where we need them to get to. And it was just that moment where we said, we think we might be able to do this better because we understand the DNA of the brand. And so that was the impetus for us bringing it in, was to say, all right, how do we own our own IP in this space? Like, how do we own the strategy? How do we own the creative so that it just comes from the heart and comes from the people who really live this? And how do we bring in particularly creatives, but strategists and planners and account people and creatives who are willing to work inside a corporate marketing group, because it's a very different dynamic than an agency, and kind of get what we're going to ask them to do, but bring that same level of creativity that we could get from the outside agencies. So it's been a process of, and really you just have to convince them this is not about saving money. This is not about, we're not going to just, I will never tell you to bang it out. I will never have you do a banner. Like, this is about tackling the thorniest creative problems we've got as a company. And we want the best people in the world to do it. And those people have to be in the company in order to really get it. And so that's kind of the premise of how we went at it. And I think that still holds true. Like that this idea of the people who know the company best should be the ones who tackle the thorniest issues, I think is true. And I think is the foundation for what we'll keep in-house. But as you know, and partly spurred by the pandemic and partly spurred by me, obsessing over it, we started to bring everything into that model. And it was just at a point where I think we went too far. We weren't doing the super tactical stuff, but we were starting to do just more of the day-to-day work. And you started to see the creatives getting disillusioned. You started to see the strategists getting frustrated. You just started to see the team go, we came here to tackle those really meaty challenges. And we're really focused on how do we get, social posts out onto owned media right now that get high engagement rates. And that's where we started to go, all right, maybe it's square peg round hole right now with the team we've got and what we're trying to do.
That's interesting because you mentioned sort of speed a little bit in there when you talked about posts. Any points of view on bringing services in-house? Does it truly make you move faster, or is it depending on the marketing service?
Yeah, no, it's massively faster. But I think the thing I learned is that if you set up speed as one of the reasons you're doing it, you terrify people who you're trying to bring into the company, because they look at it and go, all you're going to do is shorten our timelines. Like, you're just going to assume you're not happy with how fast your agency moves. So you're going to bring us in-house and you're going to just shorten all your timelines. And it's not that at all. The speed actually comes from the speed of the brief. You suddenly start to have, and this does not sound like a best practice, but it really works. You suddenly start to have the strategists and the senior creatives in the meeting with the product people, talking about the technology, talking about the roadmap, all of those things, and really starting to get it, so that when the creative brief actually comes in, everyone's aligned, everyone's got it. And then it's typically the first round of work that's right. And whereas when we work with an agency, it would be 2 or 3 rounds sometimes to get it right. So it's not that we're compressing the production timing or anything like that. It's just you get off the mark much quicker, and you get sort of from 0 to 1 in that first concept much quicker, just because people are indoctrinated in it and know it.
And then, do you think you have certain marketing or agency services that should not come in-house, that are definitely better suited for a large scale advertising agency, for example?
Yes. I don't know about a large scale ad agency. I'm still struggling a bit with that one, but I will say that I've always thought that media should sit externally. So planning and buying, for the most part, should sit externally. We're starting to have discussions around insourcing on some of the digital fronts, but I don't have a lot of expertise in that. And so I think just personally, that's one I'm not that comfortable bringing in. I also think that some of the much more specialized skills like research and analytics, SEO, a lot of things in the digital and social space where you really have to have deep and relevant and always evolving knowledge of what's happening in social, what's happening in digital, isn't the right thing for what we've got, which is essentially a fixed group of people who sit there and just think about the company, our challenges, and how to address them creatively. That team is not going to be up to speed on, how the Google algorithm's changing, and therefore how you do your search differently. So we need outside experts who always stay on top of that sort of thing. I'll give you an example. Like, we focus a lot on earnings, and which is not a high investment area for us, but thinking about how do we put forward the brand on an earnings call, in in the materials that we develop, in the road shows, in the analyst meetings, all of those sort of things, is super critical to how the company's perceived, how the company's valued, to the stock price, reputation, things like that. But that's not something I could ever imagine bringing an agency in to do and having them just inherently get how to do it. So I look at it and go, I'm now really willing to have conversations with agencies about specialized services. I'm also, I should say, really open to scaling services. So adaptation production companies, we work with a great one who is just brilliant at taking a master asset and just evolving it, not just resizing it, but actually taking it, transcreating it, evolving it for different media, different markets around the world. And so I look at that and go, I would never want, I'd considered it for a while, but I'd never now want to try to build that in-house. So I'm pretty committed to keeping that core capability that really goes after those super strategic, thorny, meaty brand challenges. But a lot of the rest of it, I'd look at and go, all right, let's go find exactly the right partner to do that, which is 180 degrees from where I was 14 months ago.
And then you mentioned talent, talking to talent, bring them in, Quinn. Any challenges there, or was that actually sort of I'll call it a labor of love, that you actually went to the market, found people you want to bring in the company and take on this work?
It was hard. I mean, we looked, in order to build out our core creative team, we probably looked for a year and a half. And that was to add 9 people. And so it was really about just having a very clear, candid conversation about what we were looking for, and kind of that the quid pro quo almost, the fact that if I'm talking to a creative, you're going to come in and you're going to work on one brand. You're going to work on Lenovo. We've got product brands, but essentially you're going to think about one thing the whole time. And so very different from an agency world where you get opportunities on multiple brands, multiple clients. So that's the downside in a sense. The upside is you're going to work on things that truly, truly challenge you strategically and creatively, that are just, you can't even, this is not an ad campaign. This is not this is not what you typically get. If we're pulling people from a traditional agency, this is not what the traditional agency has you doing for clients. It's a very different brief. So it's a very different brief, which will stimulate you pretty significantly intellectually and creatively. But it's going to be for the same thing. It's going to be going up against the same brand over time. So we obviously had much more detailed conversations about roles and responsibilities and what day-to-day life is like. And there's also it's a very different lifestyle on the client side than it is on the agency side, and very different modes of compensation. Like there's all different facets to it that when you're having these conversations, you can be pretty open. And I was really careful, and our creative director globally, I know, was really careful as we went out to talk to these people who we wanted to bring in, to not sell them on it at all, to not go, it's going to be amazing. Like this is going to be, significantly better than what you're doing right now. We went at it as this is going to be really different than what you're doing right now. Here's the pros, here's the cons, here's how here's the opportunity. And we had a lot of those conversations, and we really wanted to find someone who took the time, and a group of people who took the time to genuinely make sure that was right for them. And oh, by the way, you got to move to Raleigh, North Carolina. So that's a whole other factor for people. So it took us a long time to find the right group of people, and we did. I mean, we've got a really, really strong core, but we didn't want to bring in sort of the hottest creative who's rising up in the ranks at the top agency and throw a bunch of money at them and convince them that this is going to build their book and be the best thing ever. And, and then have them get here and go, hang on a second, this isn't at all what I thought. And I think we did that. I think we were so open and so clear and took the time that I think we now, when times get really tough, which they do, and they have, particularly over the last 14 months, the creative teams look at it and go, yes, I mean, this is exactly what I signed up for. And at times, like as we were starting to go, get way over our skis on this insourcing and start to do projects that we shouldn't be doing, they were really quick to go, hey, this is not what I signed up for. Like you said, this was going to be the meatiest, most interesting challenges of the company. And you said I wouldn't be doing banners, and I've got a brief for 15 banners right there. So those are the sort of things where we felt like we could have those open conversations and then steer us back on track to where we need to be.
And I'm curious, did that lead you to sourcing talent at agencies, or because of what you just said, maybe people that were already working on the client side where it was an easier transition and understanding of the
function? No, we actually, we were open to both, and we ended up with only people from agencies. So I don't know why. I don't know if there's a reason for that or if that's just how it worked out, but we went into it open to both.
That's interesting. Look, we have some good Q&A here, but before I get to that, want to ask you a question to put on sort of your thinking hat for the next 5 years from a brand perspective. What do you think the major marketers like yourself are going to be talking about and challenged with 5 years from now that maybe is not quite on the radar today? Or do you feel today's challenges are going to grow over the next 5 years and we'll still be talking about them?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, the question terrifies me because and that's probably the answer, which is I think that I've become so used in the last 12, 14 months to looking pretty close at the ground in front of me and really about like, all right, where's the pandemic going? What's happening? How's our business doing? Where do we need to shift? We've become very agile, very flexible, but if I'm being honest, we've also become very short term. So I think I've become very much about like, all right, how do I get through the month? Or not me personally, but like, how do we get through the month and make sure we're delivering on our targets? And then, how do we look at the quarter coming up, and maybe how do we look at the end of the year? But it's really been head down, look at the ground right in front of you. So I think, the concept of a 5-year plan, the concept of a 3-year plan right now is somewhat daunting. I think, so I think the biggest challenge, I'll just speak for myself, the biggest challenge for me will be getting the view back up and going, all right, I have to look 3 years out. And that's one of the things I mentioned at the start that we did, which was really valuable, is we started looking heavily at reputation as a measure. And reputation is one of those few brand metrics that aren't coin operated. So it's, it's driven by so much more than marketing, and it's quite long-term in how it goes. And it's really, we work with a partner who is really nuanced and thoughtful about reputation, and really good at helping bring us along in terms of thinking about all the key drivers of it. And the only reason I'm mentioning this is I think that the answer probably lies there. Like we're going to continue to focus on the short-term business, the short-term, strategies and tactics that'll drive that business. But I think allocating a portion of our focus to that reputation. And one of the things we found was that one of the biggest builders of Lenovo reputation is as people see that we are deeply committed to diversity, which is unexpected, probably from a large global tech company like us, and genuinely committed to it in ways that most of our peers aren't. And so when you start to, when people learn that, there's an irrational increase in their regard for us as a brand, and that sticks around. And so I'd look at it and go, we got to continue to sell everything that we sell, but we've also got to figure out how to leverage that to start to drive really long-term and do both. And when we go into, argue for budgets, we go in for the short to midterm budget, and then we take a portion of it and also go in for the reputation building long-term budget.
Thank you for that. It's interesting as we're getting into the Q&A questions. Some of these questions talked about what you just mentioned. So there's a question here about when you're going through the crisis and you're focused on the short term, the long-term perspective, to get back at that. You mentioned some measurement aspects to it. Can you talk more about short-term measurement versus long-term measurement of the business and things you've learned over the last year?
Yeah. We've really divided our focus into 3. There's the super short-term stuff, which is like the media metrics that show just, if you put $1 into market, how's it doing? And how do you optimize it and get more value from it? So, clicks, impressions, engagement, that sort of stuff. And we've got tons of that and groups of people who analyze that. We've got kind of the midterm metrics that are also those coin operated ones that are generally the funnel metrics, like awareness, consideration, preference, share of search, those sort of things. That again are interesting to look at, but aren't necessarily, they're more a sign of how much you're spending than necessarily your brand strength and health overall. And then there's 3 that we look at that are really long-term. One is reputation. That's really, like I said, quite involved in how you look at it. But just overall, we've got a score for our reputation versus our competitors. We've got an industry average, and we measure ourselves over the long term as to how we're doing there. We look at purchase intent. So in general, if someone sees the brand, are they more likely to buy the products? And then premium, like when they decide to buy the products, are they more likely to spend more than they reasonably should on it? So we've got, I think, like we were talking about, keeping a focus on those long-term metrics and not just saying, hey, we're going to develop a long-term plan that's super strategic and pie in the sky, but actually saying, here's our reputation measure, here's our purchase intent and premium measures today. In 5 years, we want them to be this. And maybe not us specifically, but maybe pegged to the industry average, growing 2 times faster than the industry average, or something like that. That's a good measure. If you've got that sort of measure in place, So it feels like you're accountable to what you're doing and you can quantify it. Then taking a portion of the money you get and allocating it against that sort of long-term measure becomes much more digestible for the company, for the finance teams who are allocating the money, because you're held to it and you can do it. But it also helps you structure your programs in a way because you actually have a real kind of quantifiable target for the long term.
This was great, guys. I'm sorry, I'm back. I don't want to cut you off. It's my least favorite part of this gig is interrupting these conversations, but super insightful. Quinn, I'm particularly, I've been fascinated by, in-housing, talent recruitment and, the brand agency dynamic when you think about, the types of personalities or skill sets that brands traditionally attract versus what agencies traditionally attract. And we've had different discussions with our community about it, historically. And, when you think about, a brand has to be the same brand today as it is tomorrow, as it was yesterday. So consistency is key, right? So, you build that in, whereas the agencies often think, lots of different, right? Like, they're thinking about variety, what's new, what's next. So in some ways, those are at odds, from a personality standpoint or skill set standpoint, so figuring out, do you want to build an in-house agency in some areas? Do you want to rely on those external perspectives? What does that dynamic look like? I don't know. I find it fascinating, and equally so that you've recruited all from the agency side, to come in-house, I think is awesome. So anyway, that's just my personal take on this all, but this was great. Love hearing from you guys. Really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll have you back again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, David. Thanks, Scott.
All right. Thank you so much, Quinn. Thank you, Scott. That was wonderful. We are going to keep the show going. We have 3 more great sessions. So right now we pre-recorded an interview between Rob Master, the Vice President of Media and Digital Engagement at Unilever, and Jed Dedrick, the Senior Vice President of Global Development at the Trade Desk. And from there, we're going to be going back live with Ricky Engelberg, the CMO of Vistaprint, and Denise Karkos, the CMO of TD Ameritrade. So stay with us. We got some great stuff coming up, and let's roll the show.
Rob, I'm excited to have this conversation with you today. Thank you so much for taking time.
Yeah, excited to be here with you.
Yeah,
and that was a great session. We just got done with. So
definitely.
Tough act to follow.
I know. We'll do our best. So we're going to talk about the state of streaming. We're going to talk about the state of digital video. I'll kick off with just a little bit of like setting the scene, and then can't wait to just get into it and talk. I think it's safe to say 2020 was a tipping point in terms of television consumption and TV advertising. Leading up to last year, you saw cord cutting kind of acting like inflation. It was pretty consistent, 3 to 4% a year. And then in 2020, that number skyrocketed almost 5x to 15%. And then what some people find surprising is that as you go into 2021, that number is set to potentially double. So 27% of people who still have cable are planning to cut this year. So you look at the realities of COVID in 2020 and people wanting to stay at home and wanting to binge content and have content on demand. You look at the additions of the economic pressures people felt, and they had the options of expensive cable subscriptions and increasingly great ad-supported and free content coming from the networks introducing streaming services like Peacock and HBO Max. Together, that confluence of events just accelerated so much of the trend that was happening. What probably would have happened over years happened in months. I think last thing I'll say on all of that before we get into what it means for Unilever and for the broader audience here, maybe what we think is one of the most under talked about parts of the whole thing was the impact that live sports has had on the acceleration of cord cutting and the acceleration of streaming. Our research suggested that something like 60% of people who still had cable still had it for live sports. And of course, that was just hugely interrupted last year. It's a bit of a Jenga block in terms of that tipping point where we saw if you're looking at Nielsen's numbers or eMarketer's numbers, pretty much whoever you look at, the number of connected televisions in North America has tipped and is now greater than the number of cable subscriptions. So just some level setting to get into this conversation, why it's so important that we talk to a leader like Rob and a leading organization like Unilever about what's happening. So Rob, let me pitch it over to you and just ask you to share how those shifts in consumer behaviors, created opportunities for Unilever and how you've had to respond to these accelerations.
So I think, so Joe, that's great. I think, listen, there's a lot of insights and kind of data points you dropped there. And so let me first start with just some perspective on that, and then I'll shift to Unilever if that's okay.
Sounds good.
Because there was a lot there to unpack. I think first off, it's undeniable that COVID has been an unbelievable accelerator for so many things that were happening. And frankly, there were so many things that we just never saw coming. And the reality is, I think it will take years to sort out how these trends or movements come and go. I oftentimes get cautious of the siren that like immediately everyone follows a certain trend, and like you have to be cautious and evaluate every hot take from every cultural or global moment. I think back to almost 21 years ago, following, living in New York City after 9/11 and thinking about what we thought the world would be in the next couple of years. And I think the world was very different than what we anticipated with our kind of hot takes and perspective. Something on a lighter note, like if I would have my way, if I was a teenager, I would have thought I'd be wearing parachute pants for the rest of my life. Like things going calm, and we can't take every hot take and trend.
You mean you're not wearing parachute pants right now?
I'm not wearing Lululemons maybe, but like not parachute. Maybe that's the next version. But I think we just have to like be careful, like every transformative trend and like take from that. I heard a conversation a couple of days ago. I have two teenage boys, but like this idea that like, there's the assessment now from from teenage boys is that like Facebook is like for my bubby, and bubby is like a Yiddish term for like grandmother, and like Instagram is for my mom. And right. I just think like if you think back a couple of years ago, that just you would never have thought that anyone would see the lens through that. But like that's the world we live. So again, I think that's a hot take that's not accurate either. But it just, again, we have to be cautious of like, so of course, massive change from COVID. And I think for the media industry, Unilever is thinking about these. For the media industry in general, I think there's some serious questions we have to ask ourselves. So one is, you brought up that point about sports, and I've been thinking a lot about this. So are sports ratings and sports engagement, are they really never going to come back? I mean, do we really believe that the experience, the communal experience of live viewing and fandom and watching in a bar and watching with family and friends, do we believe like that's not going to come back? I don't know. I'm just, before everyone jumps on this TV, sports are dead for a host of reasons. I just, I think to myself, I think, are we really never going to go back to movie theaters? Like, do we really feel like watching like these amazing movies in our homes or on our iPhones? Are we done with movie theaters? I don't know. Everyone's writing it off, but I don't know. It's funny. It wasn't that long ago, but if I think to like the Game of Thrones finale, like outside of sports, is that the last finale with a collective viewing experience in the world we're living?
I think so.
Are we gonna need a Truman Show essentially to like bring us all back to collective experience together? I don't know. And then I think about Netflix, like kind of working our way to like this topic is Netflix's current business model, can that sustain both its current course of competing for eyeballs as well as investing for content with all the new players? Like, can that business model sustain itself the way it is with those two forces of like enormous competition for eyeballs and then enormous competition, by the way, for content? And, ultimately, I think, this almost the last question for me when I was thinking about this is that, ultimately, are we going to come to the conclusion that maybe there's a subscription fatigue and that $100 premium Wi-Fi and then all these bundles of subscriptions is actually that much better? Are we going to long for the bundle of some sort? And are we just like, so those are my first perspectives of like everything kind
Yeah.
of like you were saying, that I think is worth like pondering before we just race to like to tackle these trends, which I think, of course, we're seeing acceleration, but I think we have to pick and choose.
Yeah, I love it. I think, you're approaching it with a healthy dose of skepticism and also and nuance and appreciating that, it's not black and white and you can't know if the last year has taught us anything, it's that change is constant. And so, you could jump to any number of conclusions when in reality, I mean, I'll add a couple points to what you said. I think everyone is hungrier than they've ever been for live sports. I know I am. But I also think the networks have learned a lot about monetization. And I think streaming monetization of live sports, things like the Olympics, things like the playoffs, I mean, they were already coming onto programmatic in 2019, but watch what happens. I mean, that's going to be a really different sort of monetization strategy for those guys going forward that I think will take into account some of what we've learned and some of what we want in terms of flexibility and in targeting for advertising. And then I'll just add to your Netflix point, which I thought was great, that, compounding all of what you said is also the need for just global expansion into markets whose economic pressures actually make the US economic pressures look like nothing. And so, the need for lower cost or ad funded models to combat what you called out as subscription fatigue, which is already real, not to mention sort of streaming wars annoying people about like, how do I watch this? Oh,
Yeah.
I can't get that on X device. I can't. That's that. I think I love how you're approaching the whole thing, but I know you were about to get into what it means for you guys.
Yeah, no, so I think it's a great segue, I think, into like how we're approaching it. So listen, we've been experimenting with you can call it whatever you want, video neutral planning for years. I think we've been looking at over the last 6 or 7 years, and certainly with the rise of YouTube, early network streaming, even movie theaters and cinema. Like, how do we think about sight, sound, and motion? And it's been a very tough nut to crack. I think we applied a lot of science, a lot of data, but we have not gotten it right yet. And we just haven't. And the truth is, it just continues to evolve, and we're continuing to expand our engagement because it's YouTube obviously now, and with the early days of CW and then Hulu, and then now it's like we're doing Peacock, we're talking to HBO Max, Paramount Plus, Discovery, and there's just how do you then start putting all these things into your model, and then you have like, by the way, video without sound, and you have Facebook Watch, and so how do you begin to like put the art and science into these experiences? Because there's no question that connected TV or streaming, or again, however you want to classify it, there's a lot to be said and opportunity. So, we had a handshake agreement for many years between the consumer and the media company. And part of that handshake agreement was some advertising and some sponsorship. Yeah. And this was brought to you by, and I think over the last 20 years plus, we've broken that handshake agreement as an industry with the consumer. And there's just too much now, too much clutter, too many ads. And we've all been part of that process. I'm not going to just say it's the media companies. Obviously, advertisers in our pursuit of cost have they've expanded pods, and we've gone from 30-second ads to now 15-second ads and 6-second ads. So I feel like that is an opportunity for us to reset the balance here. And I feel like that's a huge opportunity, and to create a much better ad experience.
Yeah.
And so I think that's big for us. That's part of our process of thinking about this. The other is, the reality is younger consumers are streaming. We're going after young consumers in addition to older consumers, where we used to be able to reach everybody in the television space. Now it's fragmented, and so streaming is important there. And so I think the opportunity to target with the power of what we've gotten accustomed to in digital in the television space, I think is very exciting.
Me too.
The reality is we're not there yet. At least we're not there at scale. And that's kind of the business we're in. And so I think that if you think about like scale and targeting and the use of data, it's an unbelievable promise, but it has to also be priced right. I think we're very cognizant of like some of the first movers and the enormously high CPMs, and like that's not scalable proposition either for many advertisers. to take advantage of, like television. So I feel like you need to find a balance, but overall very bullish and exciting about the future of connected TV and the enormous opportunities it presents for advertisers like us and the industry at large to re-engage, to like reconnect on that handshake with consumers and create a better experience.
Yeah, well, look, is it fair to say, Rob, like, you know, a lot of that broken, I love the way you talked about the handshake and the sort of broken agreement. A lot of that comes from pressures put on traditional advertising channels to just ram in more cheap reach, just kind of like you talked about. And anybody who watches linear these days knows 20 ads per pod. I mean, it's made a lot of experiences kind of unwatchable. And so, you know, is it fair to say that that overexposure and trying to get more inexpensive reach through sort of waning traditional formats is a big part of that broken handshake, and that trying to get it right in digital as the eyeballs shift is a lot of the opportunity? Is that fair to say?
You know, I think it is. I think, I mean, in the end, consumers want a good experience. So for us, people oftentimes say, what do you look for in a streaming partner? And the first answer is a good consumer experience.
Yeah.
A good consumer experience that we could then be part of in an appropriate way, I think is really what we prioritize. And then certainly, I think the promise of connecting what we've seen in digital to streaming at scale is just an enormous opportunity for bettering the consumer experience and thus making it better for advertisers.
And so, you know, that better consumer experience that we're shooting for in digital, that we're shooting for in streaming. I mean, I think about that and I think fewer, better, probably more expensive ads, right? But they perform better. And so part of that is, to your point a minute ago, you got to make the math work in that equation. That has to make sense for you for reach. It has to make sense to you for targeting. It has to make sense for you for efficiency. And so as you said, the targeting that's available in digital, the frequency capping capabilities that should be available there, those should be key inputs to making that math work. And they should be key inputs to a better consumer experience, because if you can spend the same amount or less and show fewer ads that hit the target better and that achieve optimal frequency, right? That's how we start to make that math work, it seems to me.
Yeah, agreed.
And what an awesome sort of transition into the upfronts as a topic.
They're upon us. They're upon us.
They are. I would love to dig into it with you. I mean, we see and hear you guys do audience first so much globally across all channels. Obviously, that bleeding into television creates a new paradigm. And then again, I'll just cite research and say, you know, we see 60% of marketers saying that they're planning to decrease upfront commitments in 2021, and that half of those are planning to shift more into programmatic video. You know, when asked why, they're saying they want to be more data-driven with everything they do. They want to be able to measure performance better. They want flexibility to optimize mid-flight. They want optionality to be able to, you know, potentially react to the changing ecosystem. And even many of them are saying, you know, a third of them are saying they want to cancel without penalty, which can be hard. So I would love to just hear, you know, what you're willing to say and how you guys are coming into the upfronts this year.
Yeah, so I think I actually always love the upfronts. I love the pomp and circumstance of it. I love the opportunity to kind of see the programming, kind of hear from the leaders of the media companies, how they're evolving their business. So, you know, obviously a little bit different this year. And who knows, again, if they'll go back to ever the way they were, because things simply aren't the same. But listen, I think, people talk a lot about audience approach now. And listen, I can't speak for us, but Unilever's always been this audience approach. And even in the upfront, we bought audiences. We didn't buy necessarily specific programming. And I do think sometimes we lose sight of the media business, because it's always been, particularly actually even television, has been rooted and steeped in data and audience information. It just, we try to translate that into like what we've seen over the last decade. But you know, that was built on this foundation of, I think, really good thinking and working in the kind of traditional media space, both television, print. Of course, we're just taking it to a different level now, but I think it's worth like reflecting that it's not like TV was helter skelter. I mean, it was very much data driven.
Yep.
So we follow consumer eyeballs and frankly their ears. And so we did that with Facebook, Snapchat, we're doing with TikTok, Reddit, whatever it is. We're pushing for our brands to be at scale, but also in quality environments and surrounding good content that ultimately is relevant for the consumer. So in that context, we look at the upfront, we think it's going to be a different type of upfront. We think all the big players now have streaming opportunities and services, and how does that all link together? We're living obviously in very volatile times. So although we're certainly now, we can go maskless outside if we are vaccinated, there are parts of the world that are just facing their own kind of a COVID crisis now. And as a global company, we see that firsthand. What's going on in India and parts of Brazil is absolutely heartbreaking. And this is by no means over. Hopefully our vaccine will ensure us that we're protected from all these other variants. But I think we're living in certainly volatile times. And so the opportunity to have flexibility, both in the timing of our dollars, but also in how we think about the media partners and them holistically. So whether it be linear or to the streaming or to their social streaming, however it is, those are important parts that we're going to be looking for in the upfront. Ad innovations obviously is certainly something that we're very much interested in, both in this kind of like sight, sound, and motion TV space, to both create demand and then capture that demand, I think is important to us. And then last but not least is continuing to press the kind of traditional media players. By the way, I even hate the word traditional because these guys are unbelievably innovative now, and traditional makes it like they're old.
That's fair.
I think they're reinventing themselves. And I think the measurement and the data is an area that they need to step up, I think, to match some of their more native digital players. But I think they're on their way. And it's important for us as we think about the entire media mix to kind of work with them in the early days here. But I think we're coming to a place, and I'm sure you're going to ask me about measurement at some point, but that's a conversation for later. But I think that's an area also we're going to be pushing in the upfront.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I mean, I think, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the whole process, rewarding great content. We're in the I think we're in the golden age of content. I think we're still there. I think it's still growing and getting better. And I love the celebration of that as a concept. And I also, there's nothing more important to the trade desk than funding great content coming from everywhere. And I think it's an amazing opportunity for you guys to get behind that. I guess, you said it really well about, when you come to these partners, you're asking them about the consumer experience of their content, of their service, of their platform. And, you talked about sort of the handshake and the value exchange. What role do you see Unilever playing in improving and sustaining that consumer experience on those platforms? And like, what are the key levers that you think you can pull to make that a strong and better, handshake and relationship upon which so much of your growth, and global sort of output growth is based on from advertising, right? Yeah.
So I think, so just like the media companies didn't get into this situation on their own, I think they're not going to fix it on their own either. Yeah. Right. And I think so us as advertisers, I think, have a responsibility, have an opportunity. And so, listen, brands are storytellers. We tell all kinds of stories. And I think for an organization like Unilever, who really has purpose at its heart, with our brands, have rich stories behind them. So we could tell all kinds of stories and diverse stories on a brand basis. So, and it gives us a lot of flexibility to tell different stories. So, Dove can go from telling a story about a brand and its 1/4 moisturizing lotion and the amazing functional value it gives to your face and your body. Or we can also talk about a Dove story about the Crown Act, which is our focus on ending hair discrimination. That really is synonymous with Dove because it's part of our purpose. And so I do think the streaming landscape provides a potential platform for us to tell these stories in a totally different way. And that's what really excites me about the streaming space. And I think the connected TV space more broadly. Listen, I wasn't born in the media industry. I was a brand marketer for most of my career, including my first half of my career at Unilever. And so, I remember thinking when I first came into media about a decade ago, I was like, this is amazing. The digital's exploding. This is like this is the Mad Men era, you know, without the drinking. And it's like every couple of years I wake up and I realize again, this is like, as you said, a golden era, a golden opportunity. Like we are again in a Mad Men era, full of so many opportunities for exploration, and it's almost like going back to the early days of television, where you know, you talked about like how advertisers and the media industry with content like brought all this amazing content experience to consumers. And I think we are on the verge of that kind of opportunity again, and we can't blow it. And I think we're doing a host of things around ad experience, and to kind of reshape and reframe how consumers engage with that. So whether it be kind of solo ads or ads like sponsor a show, or binge ads, if like we can understand how they're using their devices. You can do curated binge ads if you want. But on command, we did some voice stuff with Peacock, where it was like the simple, like you watch an ad, we said, if you want the product from Suave at Target, just say it, and boom, we did it. Subscribe and save on the ad, you know, Amazon OTT platform. Integrations and custom content that frankly, we're not the premium, we're just not scalable for us. Now we can do it on a different level in the space. So actually, I think there's a couple of examples that I asked the brand innovation guys to show, just to give people a flavor and sense. So I'm not sure if we can roll some of those. I think the first one is something we did with Peacock and Axe. When they brought The Office back, we looked for kind of a fun way to be part of that Office's returning experience, where we could like integrate the brand in an interesting way. So why don't can we roll that, or do I have to like?
The hardest part about working from home is making it feel like an actual work day. So every morning I shower, give myself a little spray to smell ready for the day, and then I put on my work clothes, I eat breakfast, and then I head into the office.
Hey, Emma, can you get Roger from finance on the phone, please?
What? I'm in the middle of calculus. Leave me alone, loser.
I'm gonna have to let her go.
At least we have The Office.
So again, a cute spot, very much in sensibilities, and I think they did a great job, as did we, again, across our social networks, to bring that kind of partnership of Office coming back with Axe, kind of, you know, integrated in an appropriate way that's not too much, but just kind of just right.
Amazing.
So that's
amazing.
That's a fun example. Again, these things are like, to do this at the scale of like the traditional old world of linear just was like impossible. Yep. Now in this world, I think we have opportunity. So the next one actually is Punky Brewster. So, you know, I'm a little bit older than you, but I remember her as like a childhood actor, and now she's back. And so this was another example we did with Peacock for Briars. But like, again, it's an example of how you can go behind the scenes and do things that are just very different with content development, storytelling.
Soleil, we're ready for you.
One sec. I just need one last touch up. You can't rush Punky Power.
Watch the new Punky Brewster, now on Peacock, thanks to Briars.
So another cute way to kind of storytell. We work together to promote the platform, promote the show. And I think, again, I'm going back to the golden era of television and the opportunity to reinvent it with these kind of opportunities. I think it's a lot of, we were blessed. We work in an unbelievable industry to change trends, change minds. And by the way, it's a lot of fun. And so I think these are some examples. Maybe there's like some other images just to give people a flavor of some of the ththings we're doing. Are there any more examples to like share? I sent a bunch, I know, just. So I think here, if I look at these are like pause ads for Degree. This is a great example from on Amazon's OTT about subscribe and save for Tresemme. Trying to move, I'm moving your face here, Jed, hold on. So this is like kind of an ad on Hulu where it's like, hey, watch this content, and like the rest of the show is free. Again, just different ways to add value to the experience that I think you just obviously can't do in television. Yep. As it is today. I think television will be changing as well, but I think, I think streaming offers like this amazing portfolio of opportunities for advertising and again, enhancing the consumer experience. So again, I go back to like, media companies didn't get us into this, and they're not going to get us out of this. I think we have a role as advertisers to bring creative thinking to the party, and that's what we've been loved to do with our partners. We've done a ton of stuff with Peacock, obviously, those examples. But if I date back to Hulu and Amazon and others, that we're excited on the way.
That's awesome. I think it's a fantastic sort of use case to bring creative storytelling to match the formats and the platforms, and use technology to meet the moment, in all honesty. And it's such a great angle on the question of how can Unilever support a better handshake and a better deal with the consumer. At the end of the day, we started by saying fewer, better ads, right? And in my mind, those were really good. And in that world, hopefully, we don't have to continue with the oversaturation. Hopefully, we don't have to continue with trying to meet KPIs at the expense of consumer experience and also brand affinity in many of those cases. But those were amazing examples, I think, of not doing that and of really investing in the golden moment and taking advantage of the new capabilities in this moment. You did spend a while on, like the reality of today and the importance of working with the networks, who I totally agree are in most cases really meeting the moment and becoming, innovative and offering these new streaming platforms and opportunities. So in this new world, you've got both. You've got at this moment really big investments within linear and within cable, and you also have investments within the streaming and the connected platforms. Somebody I know asked a question about podcasting. So streaming's of course bigger than just television. Can you talk a little bit about how you're balancing that and strategizing having both in market?
So I think, let me actually frame this, because I think it's a specific kind of like television streaming question. But if I take a step back and just think about this more broadly, which is at Unilever, and we think about our investment, we start with a series of simple questions. Are the plans that we're developing and the ads that we're buying, are they being seen by humans on the target of interest in safe and suitable environments and measurable? And not measurable by the people who sold us them, but by independent third parties. And I think that kind of sets the framework for how we think our media investment across every channel. And so I think that's the kind of philosophy and approach we're bringing to the television and streaming space, but frankly, the media ecosystem more broadly. We've been pushing that for some time.
Yep.
But I think that, that's where we start. So so we're looking for, again, to lean into this kind of media kind of neutral strategy around which is even beyond kind of like the video neutral. Like we want to, we want to be where the consumers are, and they're engaging in environments with ad experiences that both, again, create that demand and capture ultimately. I think, sometimes we look at digital as it's like this capture demand, and television was a create demand. And so how do we kind of bring those together? Because in many cases, people are not necessarily ready just to buy right there. And so time and time again, we see that if we get too focused on like the click to buy or that performance component, that we lose sight of like building a brand and our storytelling, and it becomes about a price point or a coupon, and that's not a way to build a sustainable brand. And obviously Unilever is built on brands that have been around for decades, if not 100 years. And so you don't get there by just doing that click to buy. I think it's really thinking through the entire journey. Listen, the consumer journey is extremely different. The traditional funnel is not what it used to be. Like we're living and driving that. But I think it's finding a balance between that, both create and then capturing the demand, and being able to have that capture in a lot more places than it is today.
Yeah.
And so I think as we kind of approach and reconcile, we're going to lean in with our kind of video neutral planning, but even just broader, our media neutral planning that really puts the consumer at the center experience.
Yeah. I think it's a great, you talking about video neutral and media neutral planning from our years together, and from my exposure to the Unilever business. Unilever's led in terms of attempting to consolidate, centralize, break down silos, and bringing planning and buying and measurement together. So would you share a little bit about how that's helped you optimize, brand across regions and channels in the vast portfolio? It feels really tied to that neutrality that you just talked a little bit about.
Yeah. So one is, I think, the Trade Desk has been an amazing partner. I mean, I know we're just sitting the two of us, but it really is that's the truth. We have partnered with you over a period. I mean, that's the thing. I don't want to lose sight of, is that the importance of sitting down and sitting with your partners and nurturing those relationships. Because listen, I remember the Trade Desk started, we were working with somebody else, and it was like, and you to some degree, you can't sign long-term deals. You got to place some bets, and you figure out who can I nurture, and if it's not working, you go on to someone else. But you guys are someone that we started nurturing and working with, and I think you guys met the moments, the expression you use, and I think have done a terrific job, and I think have helped us in this journey. Because frankly, that's what it is. We're doing a ton of work in the space, but we are, we're just not even at midfield, I think. So we've been building capabilities internally with partners like yourself. I think we've also been externally focused, pushing, I think, the industry around measurement, and ultimately consumer privacy is where this starts. Again, it goes back to the consumer, and privacy is paramount. We do that, and we're obsessed talking about that and working through that and making sure our partners are kind of living up to that promise. But that said, I think the industry measurement, the use of data it's a burning platform, because we must do better than this. And I think that we could do much better as an industry and meet the moment around privacy. And so there's a range of initiatives we're involved with at GARM and PRAM, and I know working with you guys on some of the unified ID stuff that respect privacy, but frankly, make it a better consumer experience. Because again, goes back to the consumer. Without this kind of holistic view, we're going to be like spamming them with ads, no frequency controls. I think we're going to be selling them products they're not interested in. It's like it takes away all this amazing tech and learning that we've had. And of course, privacy is part of the story, but there's ways I think we can work together better as an industry to take advantage of, I think, what's in front of us, and kind of, as you said, meet this moment.
Yeah, I'll rewind and go back in time, because I was lucky to be a part of when we started working together years ago. I think it was like 2013, 2014. And Unilever's recognition of, it was so much of what you have talked about over the years of supply chain transparency, real transparency, third-party measurement, those concepts. I just want to validate for everyone, that's not just what you talk about, that's what you cared about then. That's what has happened every step along the way since then. So we also really appreciate that force that you've created, and that drumbeat that you've never let go of in the industry. And together, I feel like that's shaped so much of what we've done and what's been so important to us as a company. So I really want to thank you for that, and to your approach to partnership also. I love that you brought up Unified ID 2.0. We really appreciate, of course, the support of Unilever in an initiative that's aimed at improving the open internet, right? And really improving the consumer experience of the open internet. Because when you think about fragmentation and complexity, it's relatively simple in one giant website, and it's complex, but probably more important in the long run for the open ecosystem to centralize around something. So I wanted to just open that topic with you, and hear what you'd be okay with sharing about Unilever's approach to the future of identity. How you guys are preparing for cookieless future as a concept.
Yeah, I mean, I think at two fronts. One is, as I started alluding to, like building our own internal tech capability, which, by the way, we've been doing for some time. But I think certainly recent decisions by some companies, I think, certainly accelerate the focus.
Yep.
So with that is how are we building in a privacy manner, a solid first party data business, not business, capability. And the second, I think, taking an active role in industry efforts. I think we're not going to get there as Unilever. We're just not. In fact, it reminds me of a story. Many years ago, we have a digital advisory board of like digital leaders from across the globe. It's a global advisory board, and I was speaking at it, highlighting the competitive advantage that we've gained from using viewability and fraud, like fighting bot measures and like third parties to help us optimize our media buys. I remember like explaining to the digital advisory board how we're doing this and the competitive advantage we have from it. And they asked me one simple question is like, I get that that's great for you, but like, how does that make the industry better? How are you actually addressing the core issue? You're working around it now, but like, yeah, maybe it's all these people who aren't, but like, as long as it's all these people who are still buying things that aren't seen and bots, like that business will continue to thrive. And you're not, you need to lift all boats. And I think I walked away from that meeting like I'd been missing the point to some degree. I was so focused on like Unilever's experience and like competing in this like Wild West, or like I like to joke that for Game of Thrones fans that the media team, we are the Night's Watch. We sit on that wall protecting our brands and from like the crazy ecosystem of the media environment that's out there, the White Walkers, and so I realized that actually we need to bring others on that wall with us. Yep. And I think that was like a totally redefining, like Keith Weed, who's our former CMO, Luis Tacoma, who runs media globally. We were all there. We all walked away and said, we need to be much more proactive here. And that's when Keith went on this whole blitz at Cannes a couple of times talking about the industry efforts we need to undertake to really evolve the space. So I think there's things that Unilever's doing, pushing with our dollars, pushing internally. But I think most importantly, we're going to get there through a coalition of the willing and working through a number of industry initiatives.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly, when you think about bringing the entire ecosystem together to meet the moment, as we said earlier, of this hugely fragmented, hugely data-rich opportunity, which also, presents tons of potential pitfalls and ways to disrespect the consumer experience. There's just never been a more important time to think like that as an industry and as a partner. And when we look at our support of the industry initiative around Unified ID 2.0, part of why that's so important is being an email-based solution. It's applicable to streaming. It's applicable to all of the channels that we just talked about: podcasting, audio. This is the principal way that musicians, journalism, content producers are making money in this new reality is through ad-funded formats, and they need the ability to do targeted advertising, to do frequency capping, to do better measurement, all of the things you talked about to improve the consumer experience. So you need an identity solution that meets that moment and can do all of that, and can represent a clean supply chain. I would go as far as to say, never worked with anyone who's been as focused on a clean supply chain as our partnership with you guys. And I think understanding an identity solution that underpins streaming presents the opportunity to understand that supply chain in these new formats in a way that got a little messy in digital for a long time. And there are a lot of potential bad actors, introducing fees and funds. And so I think, that coalition thinking can really apply to these new channels in digital.
Yeah. I mean, in the end, a former colleague of mine, Babs Rangai, used to say that, we're the good guys. We're the good guys. Advertise the good guys. So I do believe we are the good guys and can be a force for good. So.
Me too. Well, Rob, let me get to a couple of the questions that have come in. There's a question about how flexibility and fluidity impact the deals that you do with media conglomerates. So I'm sure some of that is privileged information, but curious if that has the increased importance for you guys that it has as a the big buzzword, I think.
It is, but it's real. And I think we saw this last year, how real that really was.
Yep.
And you see, like we are this connected global world. Without sounding like corny, we are. So when a boat gets stuck in the Suez Canal, and the impact that has on prices and for everybody. And so I think that there are all kinds of global issues in this kind of volatile time that require us to have a set of a need for flexibility. I think it was unlike others. And so you have to, and excuse me, they're doing some lawn work, my neighbor outside here.
I can't hear it.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you can hear the person parked outside blasting
yeah.
music, but that's my version of that. So
yeah, so I think it's going to be a critical part of our strategy and our conversations with the big media conglomerates. Again, not just like, hey, we need money back, but hey, like you have a hit on streaming that's not there, or something's happening on linear, or let's remonetize and think together, like that Axe example. Like, so it wasn't just like we just did the content, put it on Peacock. They put it like in their curating content trends, and we both leverage it our social platforms. And so I think there's a lot of power to do things and take advantage of all the work they're doing beside just the 15 and 30-second spot. And we're really gonna be pushing them to do so. And by the way, you referenced before about streaming. Like, so streaming is a whole other space that a lot of these media companies are getting into. And so I think we need to be ready and flexible to deploy dollars, again, wherever the eyes and ears are of consumers.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Another question that came in was for you. What was the biggest learning or surprise in the past year?
I think the biggest learning or surprise is how our team and organization rallied. And when I say our team and organization, I don't just mean Unilever. I think we did an amazing job, from supply chain to our sales to our marketing, but all the partners that we work with, from PR agencies to ad agencies to our media partner, media agency, to frankly our media partners, and how flexible I think we're able to rally around the moment, both in operating our business, but also stepping up in a time of need. Businesses can't sit on the sidelines anymore on issues. And so, certainly Unilever's been at the front end of this, but, we need to step in. And I think, we launched a program in March and May of March through the end of last year called United for America, around kind of Unilever giving back.
Yep.
And engaging. And you guys actually were a partner. And we had our first last year was a day of service where our employees broadly virtually volunteered, and our factories, what we did was that day was our factories, everything produced that day, the equivalent of 11 or 12 factories, that day of production, we donated to Feeding America directly for other organizations. And actually, we're now a couple of weeks away from our second annual day of service. Well, on May 14th, we're going to be doing the same thing, where all of our employees, our factories, our corporate business partners are going to be kind of rallying around the moment. So I think, to me, was like the biggest surprise, and in a very tough environment and context we're living, that I felt really good about how we as an organization at Unilever, our partners, and then the broader ecosystem of people we work with, agency partners, media companies, rallied around the moment.
Yeah, you said earlier, we're so fortunate to have the opportunity and to work in the industry we do. It's fun, and we have the opportunity to make a real impact and difference and shape some very important forces for the future.
Yeah.
I remember that day last year. I remember the team getting together and doing that work as partners, and it was a lot of fun. And it also presents the opportunity to feel like we're collectively making an impact on something bigger.
And actually, by the way, even now, I think, as I think about like a couple of weeks away, the ability to get outside, and so we're working with the Boys and Girls Clubs, Feeding America. Again, we're part of the Ad Council's vaccine education, so we're going to be out, like, we're out working with them to like, let's get people vaccinated. Let me start this. It's crazy, it's been politicized, but let's get people let's answer the questions they have. Let's educate people on vaccines. Let's get them comfortable with what the science is, and so people can feel comfortable getting vaccinated. And then let's get back to like being together. I mean, I hugged a person for the first time a couple of weeks ago outside of my bubble family, and it's just like it's crazy. Like we are meant to be social beings. And certainly everyone loves a little working from home, and some people who are introverts, which I'm not, have certainly enjoyed the experience. But I think even the introverts I know, they want some more human connection. So I feel like
there is a spectrum where the introverts started going crazy too.
Yeah.
That's what I noticed. I saw when I saw the introverts say, "Oh, I really need to hang out with you or talk to you," I was like, "Oh, this must be bad. We must really be." No, I love that, and I agree. I think we're entering a phase of at least in our East Coast world, some sunshine and some outdoor, which is making a big difference, and it feels really good. And I also really appreciated your talking about information, because after all, we are talking about entertainment a lot today. Talked a lot about fun and entertainment, which is important for everyone. But at the end of the day, media, ad-funded media, is largely the most important global source of information, such as the vaccines that you're talking about as well. So this is bigger than entertainment. It's how we talk as a global community. So Rob, let me just say thank you so much. That conversation was so fun and so enriching. And I really appreciate your approach and Unilever's approach to meeting the moment, like we talked about.
All right, that was awesome. We always welcome the wonderful Rob Master from Unilever on our stage, but I know that one ran a little long, so we're going to keep the show rolling. Let's bring on, we have Ricky Engelberg, the Chief Marketing Officer at Vistaprint, longtime Brand Innovators friend, Emily Knight, the Director of Business Development at the Trade Desk. Love hearing from these guys. We're so excited to have you both joining in. Again, apologies for running a little bit long. It's always tough to interrupt people. It's the worst part of this job is having to get the crook and pull them off stage, whether it's live or pre-recorded. So thanks for bearing with us. Emily, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Good to see you. Ricky, welcome.
Hello, David. Hello, Emily.
Hey, how's it going?
Excellent.
All right, the floor is yours. Let's get right to it. I don't want to take up any more time. I'll be back in a little bit and when it's time to wrap.
Perfect. Good to see you, Ricky.
Great to see you as well, Emily. Excited to be here today.
So to get us started, I would love if you could talk a little bit about your past experience before you made the move over to Vistaprint as Chief Marketing Officer. My understanding is you were at Nike for about 20 years. So curious to learn and hear from you what was some of the best parts and experiences you had at Nike to bring over to Vistaprint.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here today. Always a treat to get to do a Brand Innovators event. For me, Nike was an amazing 20 years. We got to work on some absolutely amazing, never been done before things. And I think what was exciting about it was just this ability to truly imagine a future that could be better for athletes. And that idea that our job was to know the athlete, to serve them, and remove friction from any part of their life that prevented them from maximizing their potential. And I think that what was interesting to me was by being there for so long, you see that sometimes things fail, not because they were wrong, but because they were early. And that maybe that generations change fast. That what a 16-year-old basketball player wanted when they were in 1999 might be different than what they wanted in 2009. And that notion that things evolve fast was an absolutely critical component that I took from it, and that you could play a much larger role than just the item being the end of a transaction, but rather it becoming the beginning of a relationship. And I think that's something that when I began to think about what would be after Nike for me, really that opportunity to be able to take that same passion and understanding of how to serve an audience, a community, and help be able to bring great design to the world, help small businesses was something that was so incredibly interesting. As that opportunity to be able to help democratize and give access to what's formerly unreachable. Be it getting someone ready for their first 10K or first half marathon, or helping someone figure out how to open a pizza shop, where those that kind of exist in the same parallel.
Yeah.
And that idea of being able to really truly help even the playing field is so incredibly interesting and exciting. It's something that ultimately led me to make the leap to Vistaprint. But again, it's interesting. It's to me, the way we approach things every single day on how we want to serve our customer at Vistaprint is no different than the same way we thought every day on how we might want to serve a 16-year-old basketball player or a beginning runner. And the expectation that the work we do should have as much impact in the world is something I think is the way that I think everyone should approach their job. Like, there's no reason that inspiration and impact is something that's only something Apple could do or only something that Nike could do. I think a large part of it is aspiration to actually make that impact. And it's something that, and having a great product and a great service and a belief in serving customers. And it's something I think it's important to bring every single day.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you mentioned that. I know Vistaprint has, since you've joined the team there, you've been working to reposition the brand, and you've had some pretty exciting campaigns in market over the past year. I'd love if you could talk a little bit about This Is Not a Mask campaign and how that came to life and how that fits into the broader positioning that you've been focused on since you joined the team.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, so I'd been at the company around 5 months 5 or 6 months when the pandemic hit. And we were working on this work that was, for Vistaprint had existed for a really long time as the seller of business cards, the company that helped you get your first business cards, a lot of DRTV, discount codes. And it was a company that impacted a lot of people's lives. It was the amount of people we meet with that are like, when you all called about working with us or emailed, it was so exciting because we knew we were a small agency, that we were real when we got our first business cards from Vistaprint. And it became abundantly clear that this opportunity was there, that like, to a large extent, we're a partner in people's dreams. And what was interesting was, so we started working on these campaigns of trying to play up more of like if items and solutions or us as a partner, which all holds true. And then the pandemic hits, and it's difficult to say, think back to last March, like no one knew what the next 9 months were going to be, or the next week, the next 2 weeks. I'll never forget leaving the office and having someone be like, hey, you don't need to grab all your stuff. We'll be back in 2 weeks. And like, they were really wrong.
Yeah.
And the idea of like, oh, school, like we're going to have school closed for 2 days and for deep cleaning. And that deep cleaning went for 8 months. Right. And so, but what we realized in early April of last year was, based upon the global nature of Vistaprint and Cimpress, our parent company, the supply chain that we had was going to allow us to actually help make masks at scale around the world, a very high quality, great mask that was going to be fairly priced, great design, and something that was going to be absolutely critical. We'd heard from our colleagues in China and our colleagues in Italy that masks had just become the new normal overnight. And at this time, so our leadership team were like, myself and the CEO were like, we've got to go and do this. And we worked with partners like Work & Co to create an amazing new experience to, again, design forward. We worked with partners like Champ out of LA to help get different artists to go and design masks. Because our point of view was, if we're gonna, as to where we were heading, that was gonna be so critical was that everyone got comfortable with masks and access to masks, and understanding that the best way for a community to reopen, for a small business to safely operate, is not for the barista to feel like when the door opens at the bakery or coffee shop that they're going to have to get in a fight with a customer about wearing a mask, but get everyone to understand we're all in this together. And the best way to get back to the things you love is by embracing that masks are that key to it. And it was a very different place for Vistaprint to go, because Vistaprint had been selling items and not going on the understanding the role we played in truly helping impact the greater community we existed in and help being an advocate for small businesses. And it was something that, if you think back to last April, you couldn't run mask ads on Facebook or Google because it was viewed that mask sales were stealing precious needed masks from healthcare workers, which in a great irony might have been, in some regards, was true. Mm-hmm. But the lack of masks getting adopted was creating more issues of for healthcare workers. Yes. And so we went and made an ad, "This is not a mask," which would tell the story of like the importance of masks as part of a community. This is not a mask, it's a sign of love. And all of a sudden found ourselves in a bit of a political firestorm for a bit. And our performance, our display team every day had to come in and repost all of our ads, because even though we were told they were approved each day, it would get removed overnight based upon systems. And it was a unique, interesting time for us. And multiple times in the journey, we thought masks were going to be done in like 2 weeks. It's like, oh, in 2 weeks from now, everything will be fine. But we kept plugging away, and I'm incredibly proud of, like, when you walk down the street now, and maybe it's just me noticing, like, I can't go 2 blocks without seeing someone in a Vistaprint mask. My favorite bagel shop down the street, Exodus Bagels, every Saturday, each has their own custom different color mask. During the election, watching reporters on MSNBC, one after another, wearing custom or artist Vistaprint masks. My kids each day fight over which mask to wear, and all their classmates have Vistaprint masks. And like, I can't imagine what life would be like if for the last 5 months, every morning I had to beg my kids to wear masks to school because they're not allowed to go otherwise. Instead, every morning I'm breaking up fights over who gets the rainbow mask or the skeleton mask. And so, again, for us, it was so important to be able to understand that it wasn't just about trying to sell a mask, but it was about trying to get communities reopened safely, and that we could play a much larger role in that conversation that I think we would have given ourselves credit for pre-pandemic.
Sure. And I think it's pretty interesting. You mentioned serving communities and supporting the local businesses was your mission before. That really didn't change, just how Vistaprint responded and came out with the mask campaign to really bring that to life, which is pretty incredible. So we've been working with Vistaprint a bit over the past year, and I've been incredibly impressed by your marketing organization and how you collaborate with agencies, but are super sophisticated internally. Just curious how your approach has been brought into life with your new efforts around branding and bringing this revamped strategy to life.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I appreciate the compliment on our team. Our team, super lucky to have an
really
amazing
impressive,
team. Yeah. It's interesting. So at Nike, we work with a lot of agencies. Vistaprint did not work with many agencies outside of on some aspects of the media side before. And I'm a big believer in agencies helping push to the edge and being an extension of an extension and accelerator to the superpowers you have internally. I would never say one of our agencies is in charge of our advertising or our media or our UX or our PR. I would say they are an extension of our team who is in charge of figuring out our PR strategy, our media. Sure. And it has to be this collaborative relationship where I've been super lucky to work with some unbelievable agencies where our account director to me would have been the person I most trusted to replace me in a meeting, because we were just inextricably linked. Mm-hmm. We were texting 100 times a day on things. But I think what's important is understanding that companies internally always will look internally more frequently than externally. We could push on it as much as you want. You could push to look for analogous inspiration, for benchmarking. But if you're an agency, you are surrounded by peers that are working on other accounts. That's job it is to make sure that every single day they understand what is evolving in the world. And again, I can't stress enough, I think I have the same expectations for internal teams. But I think that there's just a reality that there's just less consistent external cross-pollination. And there's also something to be said for, particularly on the media side, the media agencies represent a significant amount of business with partners that I think helps open the door on unique, interesting opportunities. I believe in us as a brand as well for it, but ultimately, again, I don't view it as, I view that a hybrid model. Now, things like we have an amazing performance display team internally, like particularly when you get into real-time payback optimizations and cross-pollen, like the triangulation between a performance display team, a data analytics team, and finance team. You need to have those things internally. But to me, the external partners, and again, I can't stress enough, I view everyone as, like, there's no word I hate more than the word vendor. Like, everyone is.
We can agree on that 100%. We don't want to be a vendor.
Like, yeah. And that's like, these partners, we're going to do amazing things together. And it's important to treat agencies as partners and part of the team as much as possible.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's something that's hopefully, if we're all bought into this aspirational journey of where we want to go and and challenge to do amazing work, great things happen. And so, yeah, and again, I think it's a balancing act always, but so much of it comes down to, and it's an extension of your internal team, and they are part of the team and partners in this.
Absolutely. I would love to hear your perspective. So understanding Vistaprint's strategy in the past was much more DR oriented, and you did have a large linear play. How are you guys thinking about shifting your channel investment, and how are you thinking about CTV versus TV, knowing your historical investment in linear has been rather significant and the shift in consumer behavior is changing?
So Vistaprint was very much a company focused on large amounts of DRTV in the past, paid search, non-branded. And I think a big shift has been pushing towards digital. When you look at the opportunities that exist inside at all touch points of a YouTube, it's incredibly impactful and interesting for us to be able to become great at that. From a learning agenda standpoint, connected TV has so much potential for us and so much more data that comes off of it than traditional linear television does at this moment. I mean, obviously there's ways with it with the eye spots in the world and stuff like that. But I also just think the pressure of television and linear TV is a unique beast, and that in order to get the frequency, the minimum bar is just so high sometimes for high impact placements. And I think so we have dabbled in things like, we have this campaign, Partners in an Ever-Changing World, that I think is one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life. I'm a little biased there, but it makes me laugh.
Understandable.
And like, we're like, you know what? This is a great ad for us to test on Saturday Night Live and put it on linear SNL, but next week put it on more on the Peacock and YouTube replays. And we're able to compare and contrast the learnings and see. And so right now, I think to a large extent, we look at a lot of this as a learning year for us. But we definitely love the potential that connected TV has, but there are some platforms where we know there are significant amounts of small business owners that have massive overlap with our existing customers, and tons of small business owners that are not our customers yet that we need to go and get great at. And I like the flexibility of a digital and CTV first model, more so than the pressure of, all right, we've bought this 30. That ad better be amazing, or else something's going to run one way or the other. As there is there's no refunds. Now, again, I think it's something where we'll learn more and more over time. Again, I can't stress enough, like from a DRTV standpoint, it did an amazing job for Vistaprint over the years. But ultimately, from where we need to go from a repositioning standpoint, an introduction of new small businesses, it would be tough to rebuild and reposition a brand just swapping out creative in an existing footprint.
Yes, and it doesn't have the audience test and learn framework that you can leverage through connected television and your digital partners, right?
Yep.
Like the flexibility just isn't there. It just has me thinking, I love that we were able to incorporate the NBA finals and Celtics relationship that Vistaprint has as part of our digital strategy most recently. So it's pretty cool to see that brought to life.
Yeah, it's exciting to be able to get that as part of the test this past season.
Yes. I'm curious, from this past year being all that it was, what would you say is something that stands out as being a really like a wow moment from working with your team outside of the Mask for All campaign?
There were so many different things. I mean, I think the Celtics partnership's a unique one for us in that it's new terrain for us, but we really challenged ourselves to make sure that it wasn't just about a logo patch on the jersey, but it was about truly having our sponsorship be co-owned with small businesses.
Right.
And so the idea that like when fans got back in the signage for Vistaprint was given to a small business of the game, and they would get honored at the game in an Instagram post, and you would watch them share their in great seats to the game. And this idea that we were able to create a moment that in what probably was an awful year for most small business owners,
a
moment to say you are recognized, and hopefully this is an exclamation point on the journey, is something that from moment one of our first conversation with Celtics was the types of things we want to do. Like it was about last June, we donated $500,000 to NAACP. But when we donated to them, we said, we don't want to just donate the money. We want to create a program that's about empowerment for Black-owned small businesses and giving grants to them that would help with the challenges they faced through COVID, and as well as money for design needs and marketing needs. And then rather than it just being us doing this, we actually brought the Celtics into that and created a Power Forward program where it's us, the NAACP, and the Celtics creating a program that will be this evergreen program where we've done fundraisers for the program at this point, and we'll continue to do things like that. It's also things like when I think about the importance for us of design, we went and bought 99 designs during the pandemic. Like the idea of buying a company in Australia remotely sounds crazy, but like it's not just we bought them. Like we're rolling out a program, 99 Days of Design, where we're working with like partners like Complex, partners like Refinery 29, Claima, it was an amazing career podcast aimed at BIPOC creators. Little White Lies out of the UK, 100 Thieves, the gaming platform or collective, to pick 99 different small businesses and redo their identity and help them launch or pivot or launch on their journey. And this unique opportunity to create these platforms that storytelling that allows for so much unique, interesting storytelling where it's not just us, it's us and the partner doing it, is so absolutely critical for us.
And it doesn't seem like you're slowing down with any of these initiatives as we head into the new year. What are some of the learnings that you're most excited about taking on into the rest of this year now that we're coming out of the pandemic and people are back, entering slowly back into reality? What have you seen with your team, and what are you most excited about now?
Doing it all again. But in the pandemic, we switched to remote first. Mm-hmm. Which has allowed us to begin to hire all over the world. We've hired amazing talent from world-class companies. We've hired from Netflix and from Target, Outdoor Voices, Nike, so on and so forth, where it's nice to not have the first question be, would you be willing to move to Boston?
Right.
Or would you be willing to move to Barcelona, where one of our other offices is? And I think it's something where what that impact of remote first means is so massive for us.
I'm just thinking, like, the amount of meetings we honestly had with your marketing team and your partners. Normally those would have required travel, which we're obviously more than happy to do, but the amount of integrated media planning we did together, the amount of brainstorming, pretty incredible to see across companies.
Yeah, and again, it's something where I have someone that's worked for us for the last 6 months that I talk to 5 times a day. She's based in Austin. I think we'll meet sometime this year.
Yeah.
But again, it's really exciting for us because it also helps us bring in a unique perspective of all the different small businesses around the world. It's not just what's happening in the suburbs of Boston,
right,
or in Barcelona, where we had a large office.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. As far as, I know we talked a bit about connected television and channel strategy. Are there any new channels that you guys are considering investing in for the first time, knowing your media mix before it's evolving as your audience strategy evolves? Are you thinking about podcasts? Are you thinking about audio? Are you thinking about digital out of home? What's top of mind as like new and exciting channels for Vistaprint?
I think a big test for us right now is more of the branded co-created partnership with publishers is something that I'm really excited for. The types of things we're creating bespoke with a complex are very different than being like, here is a 15. Where can we get good impressions with this on your platform? Now, not all of those will become the perfect thing, but that idea of truly trying to partner and deepen with publishers and communities is exciting for us. And I think the same holds true with podcasts. We've gone back into podcasts with 99 Designs by Vistaprint, things like 99% Invisible, Song Exploder, and just unique, interesting ways we're excited for. But we feel like it's just, it's exciting. I mean, we were having this conversation a year ago. I don't think a thing in my mind would have been like, what's our Clubhouse strategy going to be? Because Clubhouse there was like 1,000 people on Clubhouse at that point. And in the same way that sometimes at night, I just go on TikTok and watch Vistaprint unboxing videos.
TikTok wormholes, those are real. Yeah.
And so I think what's so important is just to continually understanding that the destination of being a partner doesn't change, but the route that might take us there will continually evolve. And I think how we take our best practices and our learnings and build off of those is going to be so important. But again, I look at what we've done with the Celtics, and it's now the bar for us for any partner conversation of what does it mean when we say we want to be a partner. It means we want to be able to truly co-create with you all. We want to be able to have small businesses be a part of it. And that bar is a high bar we're trying to set. But I think hopefully it helps partners truly understand what we're looking for. We truly understand what we're looking for as it's I think doing one thing's nice, doing 10 of them, 100 of them adds up and accumulates.
Right.
And I think that's what's important for us. I mean, you could take, I think every company faces the dilemma of, if you have $100 and you divide it by 10 or divide it by 100, it might not feel that impactful. But if you put that $100 in one place, you can make a massive impact. And
You're
that's
really focused on doing the partnerships well and right and deep to create that experience and impact the communities, it seems.
and then to know which audience you're going to go after with it. I think those are the things we're constantly trying to balance, is like, where is a first learning that you could then go deep with and become famous for something? And where are you ready to go and become famous with? And then figuring out where does just the blocking and tackling of mid-funnel magic that needs to happen.
Absolutely. The test, learn, pivot strategy, but doing it strategically, it seems, is really exciting. So we have 10 minutes left. There's a few questions. If we're good to jump to Q&A, does that work for you?
Yeah, of course.
Cool. Okay, so as leaders, you are always developing your abilities. What skills would you like your marketing team to develop this year?
I think collaborating, the ability to have ambiguity, be comfortable with ambiguity, and turn that into concrete things on the right timeline, but not trying to rush through the ambiguity is important. Like, if you and I got on a whiteboard right now, would we crack what's the perfect strategy for what we should do on Spotify or TikTok?
As much as I'd like to say, yes, I don't know.
In 20 minutes or less, I don't know if we crack it. But it doesn't mean it's not something that needs to be cracked.
Right.
And I think that's something that's really important, is the ability to understand that some things take time, and the ability to collaborate across an organization. And I think most importantly, though, it is truly loving our customer and understanding their needs, their pain. Like, you will never waste time spent trying to understand the life of the customer. That doesn't mean that the customer is going to be able to name exactly what the perfect solution is that they need, but you'll definitely understand the pain points that exist that we need to go and try to solve for. And I think that's something where, in some ways, the pandemic, I think, helped flatten out the ability to connect with the customers, but in other ways, people were stuck in their homes for a really long time. And so I think that's something where, in the next year, I hope the world of the customer and truly wanting to serve them is the thing that we're able to focus in on.
I love it. And I completely agree with what you said about being there to solve the problem. If you can do nothing else, I think as a partner in general, regardless of your role in this ecosystem, just being there to help solve problems is key, and winning your clients' trust. So next question, what experiences best prepared you for the leadership role that you are in today? And how do you empower your own team to take ownership of their role?
And I think so many different experiences have been about transformational change, and that the importance of dreaming as big as you can, as far out as you can, setting the boat or car in that direction, hiring the best people possible, and trying to motivate them to do the best work they possibly can to get there. And it sounds overly simple, but try to do amazing things, hire awesome people for it, and do everything you can to get things out of the way that prevent that, is a pretty decent, repeatable model.
Yeah. Easier said than done.
Easier said than done. I personally also think you could trying to do that without being a complete and total jerk to people goes a long way as well.
Makes it a little better.
Yep. But I think ultimately people want to do amazing things and work on large challenges. And I think if you're able to show what you can be, what the potential is, and try to encourage that downwards, that if everyone on our team feels like over the next 2 years, they got to do the best work of their career, and they were all heading in the general same direction, something good has to happen.
Absolutely.
And I think that, and I try to keep it as simple as could be on that. It's like, we're not going to solve everything in a day, but as long as, again, what's the destination we enter into ways and what route we go on to get there are two different things. The destination is not going to change, but the route will evolve. And I think that's where having as many talented people and partners as possible, all pushing in that same direction, is something that I saw time and time again in my career, where some of the best leaders I worked for were like, hey, the Olympics aren't going to move. We need to go and change the world for the Olympics 2 years from now. There's 4 of you. Tell us what it's going to take to do that. And there's something about, I mean, there's nothing wrong with optimizing. Optimizing is just as exciting in its own unique way, but trying to understand where you're trying to go from a moonshot standpoint as a company, and getting to understand the role you play in it, and then getting to go do that job is exciting.
Totally. And doing it with good energy and not being a jerk is always.
Those are,
right?
I'd like to think they're the minimum requirements of things.
100%.
It's been a long year for a lot of people.
Yeah, fair. Semi-related to that, how would you say your leadership style has changed over the past few months or past year? And how have you been able to develop more personal relationships with your colleagues and partners?
It's interesting. I think to some extent, you just can't fake many things in this environment. Like I've been interrupted by my kids.
Conversation.
Oh, sorry, what was that?
I said, like, my dog barking throughout this conversation.
Exactly.
You can't fake it. No, it's happening.
Like, I've had kids crash board meetings. I've had kids crash all hands meetings. I've had.
It's like you try.
Yeah. And the reality is like, I don't want to say, oh, that humanizes them. Their kid crashed naked into a board meeting.
Right. You're like, not ideal. Not ideal.
Yeah. Humanizing / mortifyingly embarrassing.
Right. Yeah.
But I do think trying to keep some understanding of, you never know what people have each day. Totally. And ultimately, I've been a big believer for a long time in do your job, do it awesome, be nice to people. The rest of it, who really cares? If you
all shakes out.
2 in the morning, great. If you don't, like, ultimately, I get nervous. Now, again, I have to say, but there are realities and that people can accidentally work around the clock. Like, there will always be something more to do. This Friday, actually, to piggyback on the US holiday on Monday, we added in a mental health day for Friday, because what we've realized over the last year is that encouraging people to take PTO is cool and great, but getting people to take PTO is tough, and particularly if we're excited for things. But also, when you're on PTO, the other work keeps going.
Right.
So
I recently learned this. Yes.
You get back and you're like, oh my God, there's all these emails. And someone's like, oh, hey, I'm so sorry to bother you on PTO. And so as a leadership team, we talked a couple weeks ago, like, look, we got to have a company break so no one feels like they're coming back behind, but can just be a straight up Friday to Monday, like nothing will be piling up in that time.
Right.
And I think those are types of things where, like, I don't know if we could have had those conversations and not made people look like they were complaining 2 years ago. But I think everyone's able to have the conversation like, I can't wait for Friday to not have a single Zoom and to feel guilty if I were to actually reach out to anyone. Not because I don't love work, but it's always going to be there. So I don't know. Again, that's one of the things that, from a leadership style changing standpoint, it's like understanding that, like, we're all in this together. And I'm excited to. Again, the journey's been awesome so far, but we got a long way to go in the journey, and we can't run out of gas for it.
Yeah, well, congratulations on all the work your team did this
Thanks,
year.
Emily.
Yeah, we're excited to partner with you all, and thank you for your time and the conversation.
Well, hey, thank you for having me. Thank you, David and Brand Innovators crew,
Thanks,
for
David.
having me.
This was great. Ricky, seriously, always, we love having you here. It's so insightful. You're so inspirational. Emily, wonderful job, leading this conversation. I know I took away a lot, from the emotional connections you guys are forging with your partners as, right, your dream makers, you're helping them start their businesses. I love that. And, building on the performance work to everything that we're talking about. Who can't relate to? I mean, there's got to be like a dozen people at Brand Innovators at this point that we've grown over the last year that I haven't met, that haven't been to an in-person Brand Innovators event, right? Like, I'm excited for them, and there's all these, cultural, things in that respect. So we relate to it, and we always appreciate your insight. So thank you, Ricky. Thank you, Emily. We'll have you both back again soon. So we really appreciate it.
Talk soon. Have a great rest of the show.
Thank you. We got one more amazing session. The wonderful Denise Karkos, the Chief Marketing Officer of SiriusXM and Pandora. Rob Greenholtz, the GM of Business Development for the East for the Trade Desk. Welcome, Denise. I think Rob will be joining in a second. How are you, Denise? It's been a little while, and I know
it's good to see you.
Things are going. Did I hear some? I've heard some big news this week at Sirius. It's maybe free Sirius week or the free trial week, which is always big. You had a big TikTok news, I think I saw. So lots going on.
Yeah, the team's been hard at work. So a lot of good news. I'm glad you're picking up on it. SiriusXM is free for the next couple of weeks. So turn it on in your car or get the streaming app and listen for free for a while. So get a little sampling.
I love it. Well, all the more so. I know, I love it. And that's all the more so we appreciate your time. It's always busy, but when these things are going on, we know it's extra busy. So thank you for joining in. Rob, I think you're on mute, but I'm going to turn the stage over to you, and I'll be back in a little bit. And we look forward to hearing what you guys have to say today.
Thanks so much, David. Yeah. Very good. All right. Hi, Denise. How are you?
Rob, you're a little fuzzy. You might want to try it was coming in a little crackly. I don't know if it's the AirPods or. Maybe we'll try. It's always.
How's that sound?
Much better. All right.
Perfect. Thank you, David. Hi, Denise. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too, Rob.
Yeah. Really excited to have this conversation with you. And I know we had a nice prep session, but I figured I would throw a curveball at you in the beginning.
How sweet. How sweet.
But it's a nice, easy one. I am early part of my career worked in the music business. I worked at Sony Music for a number of years. Music is a passion of mine. I knew every artist under the sun, then got out of music, got into marketing, got into sales. And so I find, listening to SiriusXM in my car, a great opportunity for me, not only to keep up on new music, also engage with my kids on passions we both love. But from you, would love to know, what is your favorite SiriusXM channels?
Oh, good. All right. Softball.
Softball.
Pearl Jam Radio. I mean, there's no question. I am a huge Eddie Vedder fan, and I love the Pearl Jam channel. So that is my number one. There is a little close number two, which is Yacht Rock, which is a bit embarrassing. But
just starting again, right now.
Right, exactly. So I'm
yes.
girl, so a little Hall & Oates every now and then never hurt anybody.
Yeah, no, I think it's great summertime listening. I happen to agree with you. Lithium is my favorite channel. So 90s rock, like classic rewind, like the Pulse for a little bit new, a little bit old. And then the Tom Petty channel is just a great sort of historical, reference for me, and goes back to, because he plays so many different music on that channel. So anyway, it's a fun thing for me and my kids to do together. So thought I'd start off there. Easy. Let's get into conversation that people are really here to listen to. And I think the best place for us to get started is by learning more about the leap you took from TD Ameritrade to SiriusXM about a year and a half or a little more so ago. Talk a little bit about this time in your career. What was really exciting and interesting for you about making this switch?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a lifelong marketer, very goal-oriented my whole life. And I had, mad aspiration to be a chief marketing officer. Kind of, my goal was to become that, as a leader by the age of 40. And I kind of determined that early on in my career, maybe about 5 or 6 years in. as an assistant media buyer, that, I think I might want that person's job. And kind of watching leaders and who I was emulating and decided that was the path for me if I could make that happen. So it's funny, I achieved that at 42, so 2 years was my goal, but I'll take it. And had a really incredible career at TD. I was at TD Bank and then TD Ameritrade. And, after being CMO there for about 5.5, 6 years, I kind of realized that I had an incredible team. I was now definitely a financial services marketer, and I didn't see that coming. So I kind of thought I didn't do the hard work of what's next. And so I started doing that hard work and thinking what would be next for me. And I decided it was to kind of leverage my experience into a category that I had a lot of passion for, which was kind of sports and entertainment. So didn't even think about SiriusXM, but when that came on to my radar, it was like a perfect opportunity for me, because not only was it an opportunity to pivot into a category I was passionate about, but they were looking for somebody who had an acquisition experience in terms of bringing two cultures together. For those of you who don't know, SiriusXM owns Pandora, and Pandora is based in Oakland, California, and SiriusXM is in New York. And so bringing two marketing departments together, two cultures, kind of, really having the experience and having done that. And we had recently acquired Scottrade, and prior to that, multiple other acquisitions in the financial services world. So for me, being wildly planful about my career, having built a team to give me the confidence that I could easily move on and not be missed. And then, being able to leverage experience in acquisitions and building teams to this new role. So I'm thrilled that I landed here.
That's great. And I know when talking, one of the topics of focus you have is building that cohesive, connected culture at SiriusXM. We'll probably talk more about this as we go across the organization's portfolio of brands, but love for you to share how you're doing this work today and bringing employees across the different brands in the organization together.
Yeah, it's I kind of had a bit of a playbook that I brought with me that got wildly disrupted for a multitude of reasons. No merger or acquisition of companies is the same. And I think with these two brands in Pandora and SiriusXM, you really had two different cultures. You had a California tech culture, and you had a media conglomerate business in New York, and people just grew up in different experiences and different cultures. And so just really taking the time to listen to everybody and make sure that you continually checked in with leadership and the CEO to say, is this how you want me to be spending my time? And is this the end goal is to get to one cohesive culture. And it requires more than just talking to your team, and I try to spend as much time in individual conversations, team conversations, weekly team meetings. But it's, culture changing is a real long game. And so letting people know where we're headed, communicating all the time. And I think with COVID and I don't see that as an excuse to kind of harmonizing cultures. Although before COVID hit, I was spending every other week in Oakland, California, just to make sure that Pandora, the acquiree, the acquiree didn't feel like a second-class citizen, and they're not. So trying to compensate for those things. I actually think that as tragic as it is to be in a pandemic, to the conversation that was happening previously, like you're getting to know each other's children and your pets and how you handle a situation.
Whether you like it or not.
Right, whether you like it or not. And I don't care if people hear me say, I love you to my husband when he's walking out the door. Like, I think all of those walls have come down, and just the line between personal and business. And I think it's actually accelerated my ambition to make sure it feels like a harmonious culture. Certainly a long way to go. I think, Rob, the other thing I'd say is it's not just about your own team, it's about your partners across the enterprise, and making sure that your team knows that you're looking beyond just marketing, but how's your relationship with the other senior operating leaders, and how's your relationship with the CEO. And I think that the gift that I can give to my team is to know that there's complete alignment with the CEO's vision and with our vision, and that those communications are always open. and very consistent. So I see that as a big part of how I show up, is that alignment and communicating that to my team.
And are there synergies across the different brands that sort of create benefits from the organization operationally or culturally? Obviously, you mentioned they are two different types of companies, but are there ways that you found that by combining those two, there's a better value that's created by that?
Yeah, I think we recently also acquired Stitcher, and so those are additional responsibilities. There's also their CMO came over, Amy Fitzgibbons, and she's phenomenal. She's taking on some of those responsibilities as well. But what I've been able to do is, again, our CEO Jennifer Witz has a desire to get efficiency out of any acquisition, but not the way you would think about it historically. It's not about necessarily reducing headcounts to hit expense targets. It's not about that at all. She and I share the philosophy of functional alignment. If you have an incredible capability and a leader around brand, then let's consolidate the brands under that leader. Same thing with performance marketing. We have incredible talent in performance marketing, and so have that leader manage all three brands in that case. So I think functional alignment, relying on the leader with the strongest capability in that area, and then stacking the deck underneath them. I think, I want everyone to stay forever, but I'm also, aware that if I can give somebody three brands in their portfolio for one job, that's a pretty sexy thing to put on your resume. But also it helps the teams, because you've got someone who understands the craft of what they do, and they can apply it, to different audiences, be it the Pandora audience or Stitcher or SiriusXM, and just apply that skill set. I think it's been challenging in the best way for people and keeping them motivated.
An area of passion that you discussed in our prep call is leading teams through change. And there's been no shortage of change or uncertainty in the past 18 months, right after you started your job at SiriusXM. So are there key moments from the last year as your role as a leader that was especially important to guiding the organization through these uncertain waters?
Yeah, I think, I always used to say, when people would leave a meeting and they'd kind of regret something they said or feel like they let someone down, I would always say, kind of just generically, you never know what someone else has going on in their lives. Like that reaction, that glance that you saw that was aimed at you could be for some other reason. And that spoken in the past, with a huge learning moment for me in my career was when I had to do a new business pitch internally, a prep meeting when I was at VIA, and a team of us went and pitched the CEO and did our practice for the pitch that was a couple of days later. And, we got all right, sounds good kind of reaction. And we left, and I was so disappointed. And someone looked at me, a gentleman, Tim Vidal, looked at me and he said, well, what's wrong? But he said it was good. I'm like, yeah, but like, he didn't say it was great. He didn't kind of look me in the eye. Like, I didn't get the attaboy. And he's like, he's running a company. Like, he has expenses to think about, heads, mouths he's feeding. Like, you wanted an attaboy and you got an okay, like, grow up. And it was such a nice, lesson for me kind of earlier in my career. And I think that leading through change now, I think the kind of more cavalier comment that I took from my own life lesson and give to teams to say, you never know what someone else has going on in their life, is now like the empathy and resilience of this team is unbelievable. So I think you actually see it now. You see that someone is showing up, getting the job done, and being super positive. But if you ask three questions, they're probably on the brink of breaking down because they've got kids tugging at them. They're not doing, they're splintered so thin. There's been job loss. Like, if you dare to poke and go deep, it's amazing, that you're really trying to build that empathy for a culture that's been wildly resilient on the surface. So I just think that leading through change is about creating relationships at a deeper level now. And I think you become a much stronger team if you can do that.
Yeah, I agree. I think, listening to your team and listening to the organization more than ever has been a really big part of how our company has navigated through the past year and a half or 14, 15 months, and really making sure that everyone's voice was represented. But to your point, like the bond, I think it became easier to create these bonds because you have this one-to-one connection with everybody. As much as we want to be off Zoom, it does create this deeper connection with your employees and your teammates because you're spending a half hour at a time or 15 minutes at a time with someone, really engaging with them. So I think that totally resonates with me as well, and think that those,
it's funny, Rob. It's like I also find that like I'm getting feedback too from my teams, whereas people may not usually do that. I think because it's so casual and intimate and on a Zoom, my team will say things, oh, the D's getting impatient, like she's doing that thing she does. And I'm like, I didn't know I did that thing. So it's, I love it because I'm kind of indirectly getting feedback now that I probably wouldn't have gotten.
Yeah, I think it makes you more aware of yourself, and you're forced to be. But I think it also, to your point, it gives people, the right venue to have those conversations and sort of magnify something or bring something out that maybe just with people, in an office of everyone around, maybe just didn't feel comfortable doing that. So it does create that intimacy. I want to encourage the audience to send any questions in through the chat at the end of the conversation. We will read them, and Denise will answer any of your questions you have. So I think I want to talk about, continuing on this theme. We all know building an effective organization and strong marketing team specifically requires a lot of thought and structure for learning and development to make sure your organization is poised to capture future opportunity as the industry shifts. Are there any mechanisms you've put in place at SiriusXM to make career growth part of that day to day?
Yeah, I think I've found in my career that one thing that's really helped me is to have kind of tried and true frameworks for your thinking. Whether it's how brand strategy and culture intersect, or if it's how to, when I came in, I was asked, okay, should SiriusXM and Pandora come together as a brand in the business? And, I had a framework for the thinking in terms of how you approach that. Same thing with teams. I think, I have always approached things from like a strategy, structure, staffing point of view, and making sure that everyone's clear on what the strategy is for our department and for our company. And for us at SiriusXM and Pandora, it is all about driving growth for the business. And it's a little bit of a new narrative here because I think that there are other functions that have been more accountable to driving revenue and EBITDA. But for us, I want to be part of that accountability. And so knowing that we're about driving business growth, then how do you then structure for everyone to be enabled to be able to put those wins on the board? And then, who are those people? So kind of then you populate kind of the seats on the field. And, it's always helped me to have that kind of framework. And I think if we're looking to drive growth, then you need a structure that frees people up to be accountable and gives them the resources that they need. And I'm not there yet. I need to empower my people more. Because we don't own a lot of the drivers, but we need to influence them. And that's always a harder, pursuit. And then make sure that you've got people with the energy and the, ability to bring things to fruition and be accountable to results. So that will always be a narrative I will drive home. I don't think you can be a marketer in this day and age if you are showing up still talking about things like upper funnel and familiarity. Like, great, but for what? We have the tools in place now analytically to really go deep into how all parts of the funnel drive the ultimate outcomes for the business. And so that's important to me. And that's kind of the framework I use to get the team, built to deliver.
Gotcha. And I know you also talked about, making it easier for the employees to work across the multiple brands to sort of stretch their skills and learn. Maybe just talk a little bit about how you've done that and how you've enabled them to basically grow their skill set.
Yeah. I think I always like we're not that big of an organization. We're only 5,000 employees. And so I never want things to feel so hierarchical that people can't direct drive to the people who have the answers, be it senior to them or not. So at TD, I was very proud that my leadership team and I had implemented a professional development day very formally. And it was, every quarter giving a day off that we all shared where we devoted it to our own professional development. And, the whole company was behind that, not that it was pervasively held, but in marketing it was. I haven't been able to implement anything like that here simply because there's been too many balls in the air. But I would like to continue that. For now, I would say it's much more about giving people access and empowerment to the people that can help them grow. And so it's much more about, if you are running performance marketing for Pandora, Stitcher, and SiriusXM, but you don't have the MarTech you need, go hard to the people who have the MarTech, surface the issues and come back to me and we'll try to crack the code on it. I think they will grow not only in their capability, but they'll grow as leaders to figure out how do you use your influence to actually have impacts. And that's a big narrative for me personally right now, because we are still coming together as one leadership team because we came from different organizations. People have different objectives naturally, and we will come together. We're going to come together under a cohesive vision. What are our, collective KPIs? But until that happens, it's been remarkable to me that no matter how strong your relationships are and how great you feel like you're having influence, bringing it to the finish line and actually creating change through others, I think it's really challenging unless you're all aligned to kind of one key goal. So that's like the work I'm really focused on. And, I admittedly tell my team after a year and a half, I think I've enabled them and empowered them to create the relationships, to build that influence, to surface things to me. But, actually getting it solved and resolved is going to require the senior operating community to do a lot more work. And we're in the throes of that. So it is a lot about getting things done through people, but we need goal alignment in order to make that a reality.
Yeah, it's a big job. I would love to shift to talk a little bit about, SiriusXM's business model and strategy. I think, for people who don't know, maybe you could just discuss how SiriusXM is organized. Obviously, there's multiple brands, and maybe just talk a little bit about how that's working and sort of what businesses you actually look after.
Sure. So there's SiriusXM, which is historically known for an in-car entertainment platform, and that's the most mature part of the overall business. It's our 20th anniversary coming up this summer, and it's a wildly successful business, which is fantastic because it kind of gives you air cover to test and try, whether it's an M&A strategy or other big bets you want to place. And then you've got SiriusXM's app. So the SXM app was launched a few years ago, and we're really starting to build traction around that now. And that's going to be our strategy to de-risk the interruptions we're going to get in the car with, whether it's Apple CarPlay. The previous speaker was talking about Spotify, shame on him. But those are realities of consumption and listening habits. And so we want to diversify our portfolio with things like the SiriusXM app. And then we've also, of course, got the Pandora brand. And then we have Stitcher now. And so the Pandora is a free service, and so as is Stitcher. And so we can build scale on those platforms by having ad-supported business. And our ad sales team is on the hook for more aggressive goals every year, and I think they do a fantastic job. But that's how that business runs. And then you've got SiriusXM, which is a very lucrative subscription model. And so if you think about the skill sets as marketers, you need to figure out how to leverage the scale of on-platform marketing. You then, from SiriusXM perspective, you have to leverage the skills of how to run a subscription business, and how to convert the trialers in the car to a full-paying subscription. And then for the SiriusXM app, it's how do you, from a brand perspective, deposition the notion that SiriusXM is only in the car and build brand awareness that we are now on connected devices, we're on your app, on your phone. So there's a multitude of marketing skills that are required to kind of keep all these businesses running and running profitably. And I think the other thing I would say about the business model is that it's really fun for people who enjoy puzzles, because we will create a deal with Kevin Hart for a podcast, and he is a partner of SiriusXM. He's one of our talents. He has a show, Laugh Out Loud Radio, on SiriusXM. So he's creating a podcast, and it's exclusive to SiriusXM. So that's a beautiful thing because it adds value to the listeners that are paying a lot of money to have the value in that subscription. So, but then we want to, get more scale. And so then you want to put it on Pandora and Stitcher. It becomes less premium then. And you then also get the benefit of more eyeballs, more listeners. Kevin's going to like that. Our ad sales people will like that. It's all these decisions about when to democratize the content, when to keep it in a walled garden. In those, again, back to frameworks, we're working on kind of a content distribution framework now for how do you start at the brand level, the role each brand plays in the listeners' lives. And of course, that's all dependent and predicated on the listener and everything you know about them. And then how do you make content decisions to support what the platform's job to be done is and what the listener needs. So to me, I think that's the fun stuff. That's all strategy and fun stuff. And I also think it's massive team sport stuff, because if I were to come and say, here's the content strategy, the people who actually do that for their day job wouldn't be too happy with me. But being a really good partner and getting more brains at the table to sort through those things is important, especially because the business is just pretty complicated.
Right. So the content strategy makes sense, and it's great to have assets like Kevin Hart and lots of other things you guys have in sports and music and entertainment. In thinking about the ways you're looking to grow consumer engagement across the different channels, talk about what's working, how you do that now, and maybe sort of like where you see yourself going for the organization.
Yeah. So we have so many platforms through which to communicate with our consumers and to engage and retain them. It's fascinating to me that we've got such a myriad of tactics to accomplish that. We've got certainly a lot of on-platform advertising that does a good job of knowing which next best feature to promote to which segment of customers. Who's going to be interested in Drake's next release, who's going to care about the next Gayle King. And we have so much data and so much sophistication in our targeting capabilities. It's really intoxicating. But then you go all the way to the other side of we are, I think, one of the biggest direct marketers in the country. And we do a lot of direct mail. And so for anyone listening that is a victim of our strategy, I apologize, but it works. And so when I came in, I know, sorry, Rob.
That's okay.
When I came in, I thought for sure of all the things I had to accomplish, the easiest thing for me to accomplish would be to reconcile direct mail to be more digital. And for the direct mail that we needed to do, elevate the creative. It didn't reflect a premium brand. But then I saw the numbers and the efficacy of the machine that's been built. So that I had to really be a bit humble and 100% respectful of the sophistication with which this channel strategy and the CRM machine was built. The wonderful thing is there's a lot of people that have been here for as long as the company, 20 years. And everybody's on board for modernizing that ecosystem. So it's not that it wasn't something that could come in immediately and I didn't have the ability to make change. It's that I realized I shouldn't rip the Band-Aid off of that strategy and paying attention to the data and the ROI. But we didn't have MMM and MTA models, and all of that's stood up now, and my team and all of our peer functions are really leaning into let's let the analytics tell the story of our journey, and how can we get off the kind of drug that is direct mail and understand that largely a portion of that very expensive medium is incremental, not incremental, and how can we leverage digital channels to do that? So we're in the throes of executing upon a lot of those insights, and it just shows you the importance of building the fact base that you need to build buy-in, and some of those analytical tools have really empowered us to do that.
And specifically, are there any channels like that you've seen in the early don't know how early it is, but in your early stages of sort of starting to transform from a direct mail model? Is it, is it connected television? Is it display? Is it video? Like what channels are you guys excited about that potentially have the appeal to the audience you're looking to engage with?
Yeah, well, I'd say two things. Well, just because you mentioned TikTok at the top, and we just started on TikTok, and we have a long way to go. But we had Bella Porch endorse Pandora, and 5.1 million views like that, and it's to get to that kind of scale was just fun to see, and we are just getting started, like I said. So I think that's going to be a phenomenal channel for us to really lean into and try to get that younger demo. The other thing I would point to is content marketing, and I think that the teams have done a really nice job of going from the business. The programmers are all vying to make sure that we're supporting the morning mashup and Hits One and the highway. But there's 300 plus channels, and so everybody's fighting for shelf space. And the team's done a really good job of monetizing content marketing, and so really putting it through the same analytical rigor as our performance marketing to understand the efficacy of content delivered to different audiences, largely through Facebook and Instagram. And that's been a real success story for us because we keep learning and strengthening that machine, which only enables us to get more dollars to support more of our programmers. And so I'm really eager. I'd like to see my internal constituents happy. I like to see my team even happier because they're overwhelmed with the requests. And if we can find ways to get more budget and more people because of the efficacy of our pursuits, then that's just a home run.
Yeah. And I think, one thing we talked about yesterday in our pre-prep call, and also you heard the previous speaker talk about it, a little bit about how behaviors changed during the pandemic. So I think about my own listening habits. I typically listen to podcasts on the way to work back and forth, but that commute was now gone. And so at the beginning, I didn't when do I listen to my podcast? It took me a while to sort of find the time in the day to do it. What were the sort of the changes, the consumer changes you saw from your lens, and how did that sort of affect the business overall? What changes do you guys need to make to, whether it was audience engagement or programming, et cetera?
Yeah. I think our programmers did a fantastic job to not directly answering your question, but I'll get there, is that they all the talent that was working at 1221 Avenue of the Americas in New York, all went home. Yeah. And within days stood up studios. And so our tech team and our programmers did a phenomenal job so that we didn't miss a beat. And, we didn't pretend to be something that we weren't as a brand during the early days of the crisis, when a lot of brands were coming out and with empathetic messages around, we're all in this together. We saw ourselves as escapism. And if we want to be escapism for people who really need it, a little bit of entertainment, then we better get our operations stood up really quickly. So that was, I think, the enabler to them really understanding those behavioral trends, because the programs had to be up and running. Sitting on the Pandora side, really paying incredible attention to what consumers are listening to, what's the narrative in social, what's the chatter, and building kind of the work from home playlists, or like mealtime, or don't forget to take a break playlist type of things, and really being in tune with the listener. Again, it's an embarrassment of riches with the data, and so really paying attention to it. And I think the last thing I'd say as related to those trends is that they were not the same across SiriusXM, the car, the app, nor Pandora. Pandora saw a lot of connected device listening. They saw 7-day-a-week listening, where it used to be more day-parted. And then, of course, the commute, to your point, on SiriusXM went away. And so that behavior shifted to more of the app usage, which helped that business. But it was more weekend listening for SiriusXM, which was interesting. So yeah, I see David coming back on. I guess it's my cue.
It's the cue, like I said earlier, it's the part that I hate. I always, don't like interrupting great conversations. There's always so many more things we could talk about. And I was just, and listening in and, talking about content marketing is something we hear about all the time these days, we were mentioning before, especially, not just investing in it, but tying it back into that bottom line, whether it's you're selling something or you're getting subscriptions, right? And how powerful that can be, and all the changes in the people's behaviors, the lack of the commute, how that impact things like podcasts, listening, right? So it's cool to see how you guys adapted, maybe shifted some of that over right to the app, like you were just saying. But no, this was so great. Rob, Denise, thank you so much. I certainly hope to have you back again soon. I know it's getting late in the day, but we got to wind down at some point. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for being here and sharing with our community.
Thank you so much. Happy to do it.
Yes, David, thank you so much. Denise, great talking to you.
You too, Rob.
All right.
All right. Thank you both. We'll schedule part 2 soon. To everyone out there on Zoom land and YouTube streaming this, thank you for tuning in. And we will see you back at the next Brand Innovators livecast soon. So again, 10-year anniversary coming up next month. Brand Innovators C-Suite Leadership Program during Cannes virtually next month. We won't be on the beaches of South France, but you'll be able to tune in for a 4-day series with some amazing speakers. Then we got so many wonderful things coming up. We're going to be talking about esports. We're going to be talking about retail and commerce. Check out our calendar for next month. There's some really great ones that we can dive into. But